What's the craziest secret drama that went down at a university? Professors were purchasing tricked-out laptops with their budgets shortly before leaving the university. The university in turn would let the professors purchase the hardware for a song because it was used. We're talking about 2,000 to 3,000 euro machines being purchased 6 months down the line for 500 euros. Someone finally caught on to this scheme and now nobody can purchase the used hardware. I work for a prominent university in Japan. My Japanese colleagues tend to follow the rules very strictly and blindly follow manuals. One day, an American professor had to rush to the US to see his dying mother. The staff members of class operations called him as he was grieving, asking him to still teach classes and review reports. Obviously, the lack of empathy and inflexibility led the professor to take his bags and work for another school. Students never knew the true reason why he stopped teaching. My teacher was Syrian. He was practically always at university, always tired, and always acting off. He'd sleep in his office, forget to hand back assignments, mix up basic things, cry randomly in the hallway. We later found out his family was being held hostage back home while he was teaching in Canada. The two parts that break my heart are that students used to hate him. I always liked him as a person, and as a teacher he was competent. He was just always late for everything and would mix up grades. I'd be annoyed, but sitting in his office and going through stuff, he'd always correct mistakes and was fair with his grading. He gave good feedback. When I found out the circumstances, it made me sad, because he isolated himself on the emotional side. If you wanted help, he was always there at your beck and call. If you wanted a meeting, he was there. I just wish we, as students, could have shown a bit more compassion. The second part that kills me is that we lost track of him. He took time off university. I've never seen or heard from him again. We never heard of the resolution, if any, he found. Wherever you are, Professor, I wish you the best. Our night shift janitor made some really good moonshine. Some of the professors and grad students would leave cash in our top desk drawers when we left work, and the next day a mason jar of handmade shine would be waiting there. He's since moved on from that department, but he was good people. You know, there was some real potential for being made when an unsuspecting person left some money in their drawers for their own purposes without knowing about the system. I'm glad our sneaky shiner got away scot-free. A former health sciences lecturer and her husband were arrested for keeping a Polish immigrant to the UK as a slave, locked up in their garden shed for 4 years, making him do renovations on their house. I'm a research fellow at the University of Exeter. We recently had all of our office bins removed as part of a new policy to try and improve recycling. Got lots of mass emails replying with tons of sass and annoyance. One professor just replied, "What next? Do you expect us to drive to the local skip?" To be honest, I just thought it was really annoying not having a bin in our shared office. The worst part is, now everyone brings their own plastic bags to use as temporary bins for the day, and then we end up having tons of people trying to get them into one bin that's shared by the floor. I worked for the maintenance department one summer while in college and got exposed to a lot of the drama in that department. The highlights included the school deciding that they didn't want to deal with the union anymore, so they started hiring for all the non-teaching positions as temps and then firing them after 6 months and rehiring them 30 days later. This was done because temps didn't have to be union, and also because once a large enough percentage of employees were non-union, they could start hiring non-union employees on a permanent basis. Also, the entire third shift cleaning crew, except the team lead, was made up of people with disciplinary issues. This included a man who had been caught multiple times stealing underwear and setting up cameras in the girls' showers. He was a gross old prevert. None of this was ever told to the students, by the way. The head of facilities and planning knew this was an issue and just did checks on all the bathrooms in the building that this guy cleaned once or twice a month. I worked at a large university, and right before I started, the long-time dean of the school went on sabbatical. I didn't think anything of it until 2 months later when I found out that the university forced him to take time off because he blew almost all of the school's budget on fancy dinners with donors. We're talking like more than $1,000 on alcohol-heavy meals. He showed up to official university events high off white snow and kept a second admin assistant as essentially his indentured mistress. He had a private bathroom with a shower installed in his office. He sent the school into a major budget crisis and was a PR disaster waiting to happen. It was a huge mess. The acting dean who stepped in got a lot of crap for how much damage control she had to do. Ultimately, this guy returned a few years later just as a part-time faculty member. But still, totally wild. One of our male English professors was being stalked by a female student to the point he had to get a restraining order against her. The only reason my class knew was because she saw him in the hallway, entered our classroom, and made a huge scene the first day of class, and security had to be called to make her leave. After that, the door was always locked for that class, and whoever was in the back row were scouters to let in late students. He also had to cancel class to go to court for the situation at least once. In the English department, one of the professors got arrested for domestic attacks, divorced his wife, then got another English professor pregnant and eventually married her. To clarify, the husband and the original wife were both professors. He had an affair with another English professor. The wife found out and there was a major fight, the cops were called, he was arrested for DV, but I believe the charges were dropped. He filed for divorce, moved in with the other professor, got her preggers, and then he and the ex were still fighting over child support and alimony. When I left, they all saw each other regularly at department meetings. It was super awkward. I was the pregnant professor's teacher assistant, but I was definitely team original wife. 2 professors arrested for running a crystal lab, one for unaliving his wife with lab supplies, and another one stepping down quietly for embezzlement. And that's how we replaced half of our chemistry department in a year. I'm noticing a trend between chemistry and murder in this. We're insane. I saw an email a few weeks ago that a graduate student out west was trying to poison his roommate with thallium. We found a bunch of unmarked jars of cyanide while cleaning out the chemistry closet one semester. They were stashed way in the back, just jars with zero notation. Someone grabbed them, not even sure why they touched them because you never just grab something unmarked in a chemistry closet, and he was carrying one too many and dropped one on the ground. A few people nearby started throwing up. The chemistry professor immediately screamed for everyone to get out and forced them to the eyewash station and had them all take their outer clothing layers off. She was across the room but had a really good nose and smelled the cyanide immediately. So that was fun. Not sure who'd been stocking unmarked cyanide or why, but someone had quite a hidden stash. Oh boy. Apparently the chemistry department of any given institution is just one bad day away from going on a rampage and burning it all down, whether accidentally or with forethought. You've been warned, university staff and students. Grades came out. This was back in the day when they were printed. The burster, the device that cut the grade cards up into a mailable format, had torn a belt. We could not in any way get a replacement belt from the manufacturer, so we measured how long the belt needed to be, then we went to an auto parts store and looked at a lot of belts before we settled on one and bought it. It fit the burster, and we all had the grade cards mailed that night. This is so much more wholesome than the others, which are like, after the dust settled, 2 were dead, the widow was pregnant, and all who remained had restraining orders. We fixed a mechanical problem. What a humdinger. We busted out the good rice crackers that night, I tell you. When I was going through my PhD program, a buddy of mine had his professor die on him. Young guy in his 40s, got hit by a car, boom. The not-so-fun fact was when a professor dies, their grants go away. If a grad student is on the verge of finishing, like just writing up their results, they can sometimes hop to another lab and get by. My friend, however, was only in his 2nd year. He had to start over with a new project in a new lab. Essentially lost 2 years of his life on a project that yielded absolutely nothing. Woo! Grad school. So uplifting. In our chemistry department a few years back, a grad student who was failing started poisoning another grad student they worked with closely by putting carcinogens in their food and drinks. Colorless, odorless, flavorless, thanks to his chemistry knowledge. He was eventually caught, and I'm not sure what happened to him. Thrown out for sure, perhaps arrested. Another year, a grad student pushed another student down a flight of steps to try to kill them. Chemists are crazy. A prominent professor was sleeping with his students. Actually, he met his wife that way and then had a huge issue with dating other students after getting married. Lawsuits were threatened, he resigned and moved 3,000 miles away very quickly. No news, no public info released, it was all just known through the grapevine of staff. One of the biology professors allegedly did this too while he was married. Eventually got one of the grad students pregnant and ended up leaving his wife and kids to marry the grad student. That somehow absolved him of any misconduct because they were in a legal relationship, instead of being in a teacher-student type dynamic. Other than feeling bad for the professor's old family, I felt particularly bad for the grad student's fiancé, who had given up everything and moved halfway across the country to be with her in the first place. He ended up understandably getting depressed and ended up taking a leave of absence from his own studies before supposedly moving home. Our heads of department or course directors would purposely keep dragging students, dragging is the act of pulling a student through their studies, even though the students would fail most classes. They'd purposely grade the student just above a pass even though the content of work was astonishingly bad, because if they left or dropped out it'd look bad on course stats and dropout rate, not to mention the university not getting the student loan money. From there, of course, statistics would be ridiculously high for that particular degree, so they'd then sell this to prospective students and parents. This is currently still going on. Oh, my source, you ask? I'm a lecturer at a university, and yes, it disgusts me. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. A professor was hired to start a research center, got paid a lot of money and came in with tenure. He was frickin' weird to begin with, but as time went on, it became apparent that he wasted all the funds intended for starting the center because nothing was happening but the accounts were diminishing. The whistleblower hotline was provided with a bunch of data that strongly suggested he was funneling a lot of the cash to a company owned in part by his brother, in addition to a lot of blatant and casual misuse of funds, like buying personal and convenience stuff for himself and the staff. Things started heating up and they called him for a hearing about it. The very next day, we found an indignant letter announcing his resignation and accusing the entire department and college of unethical behavior slipped under the door. He skipped out in the middle of the night, leaving a big pile of deliberately damaged equipment in his office. The university didn't pursue him. I believe it was because they were in the middle of a scandal involving faculty and students in another department and just didn't want to hear about it. Students were completely unaware. I think anyone who's worked in a university can tell you about the normal infighting between factions, character assassination carried out in formal language at review, promotion, tenure committee meetings, grad student poaching, running crying to the dean, among many other things. It used to be said of politics on the university campus that it was the worst of all kinds of politics because the stakes were so small. Quote from Charles Frankel. Oh, and I work at a state university, he's absolutely right. Yeah, as someone with half a master's degree who dropped out, I can tell you that even with my limited insight, there is nobody pettier than higher-level students and faculty. My goodness, it gets vicious in universities. My professor for grad school had his lab raided by the FBI. This happened long before I joined. Apparently, one of his first or second class of grad students in the 80s or 90s decided that they wanted to use lab resources to brew some crystal. Very easy to do with the equipment we have. From what I'm told, this student would stay late in the lab after others had left to get this done. In Breaking Bad style, he fences his substances to some distributor and thought that was the end of it. The purity of his substances was enough that they were able to trace it back from the streets to him and the lab. A sting operation shut down the lab while the dust settled, and my professor was cleared of all wrongdoing since none of this was under his direct control, and all campus resources were being misused by the student. The State Intelligence Bureau told the professor that it was the largest and purest operation they'd seen in the state at this time. I think students would be surprised just how much drama happens. I'm talking everything from major drama like lawsuits that universities have kept quiet, or EO complaints to colleagues whining at each other because one thought the other rolled her eyes at the other one. I just went to a faculty meeting that was so tense and angry that I legitimately wanted to leave the room, and it was over a small wording difference of opinion in a policy that literally doesn't matter, because it's departmental and not university-wide, so it's going to get struck down anyway. Anyway, sometimes I'm happy to go to class or meet students in my office because that's the fun part of the job, and it's usually drama-free until the last week of classes when everyone starts hustling for a higher grade. At my university, it's currently that the head of one of our research institutes and a few of his colleagues somehow awarded themselves about $1 million US each as a bonus. In my country, it takes about 70 years of working on average salary to get that money. Also, the same professor possibly forged some data and paper 10 years ago. Who knows how it's going to end, but I'm sure more dirt is being pulled on other people as well. I work at a college in the Midwest. A few years ago, our president very quickly resigned. It turns out his son was growing green herb in their basement and was selling out of their house. Whether the president knew or not is still being debated, but he resigned. Two professors in my department had been best of friends for over a decade and had a huge personal falling out. They couldn't even be in the same room together, which made the department meetings awkward or impossible. Both of them started recruiting allies at the department and basically split it down the middle. It got so bad that a committee of faculty from other departments was convened to interview every faculty member and decide the fate of the entire department. One of the proposed options was shutting down the entire major. I had tenure at the time, but tenure doesn't protect you if your department no longer exists. There is a loophole in the rules that states that if you have tenure and your department dissolves, you can keep your job if another department will absorb you. I met with 3 other departments and all 3 agreed to absorb me if I was cut loose. I was the debate coach, so the departments were willing to absorb me to keep the debate team running. Most of my colleagues didn't have that leverage. Once 90% of the faculty realized the possibility of joblessness, everyone decided to play nice. Finally. I had an advanced calculus teacher who'd come into class out of his mind on green herb. He'd write down equations on the board from a book, and about 15 to 20 minutes in, he'd invariably excuse himself and take a bathroom break. He'd then return, having clearly taken a drag of white snow, and proceed to solve all equations in less than 5 minutes, and non-stop monologued about the topic for another 5, then dismissed the class and stormed out, invariably if you actually understood or not. Most students seemed physically stunned and dazed by the whole process. I don't know whether he was a frickin' genius or a deranged substance fiend, but I studied in a big university at the time, and recently I heard he was made head teacher of the math department. So I don't know what to think. I've had professors both in undergrad and grad school that would regularly get high during class. Not before, but during. Undergrad professor was a journalism professor, and pretty chill among a department of hard-drinking, old-school J. Jonah Jameson types. Except the class was a disorganized mess, and I don't think I actually learned anything. I was also a senior and didn't care. He had an odd habit of using brand names to refer to things, the way that you'd say Band-Aid or Kleenex, in ways that you wouldn't normally, and mispronouncing them. Put the memory card into the voice recorder thus became, pop your scan disk into the TAD scan. Grad professor was clearly going through some tough crap outside of class. I'd had him for a different class the year before, and he was normal then. It was a 4-hour design class with a lot of hands-on instruction, and then he'd come in half an hour late, do some one-on-one talks, then announce conspicuously, I'm going to the bathroom, and leave for another half hour. Come back and he'd sit in the corner playing Donna Summer on his laptop for the rest of the class. I think professors seem like a bunch of people that probably have an above-average concentration of functioning addicts in their rank, mostly alcoholics. And they're eccentric to begin with, so while this is surprisingly upfront of the guy, it's not surprising otherwise. A few years ago, an adjunct lecturer found out his contract wasn't being renewed. He went wee-wee in the corner of his office before turning in his keys. It took a lot of time and a lot of cleaning, along with a new carpet, to get rid of that smell. I was a professional assistant to the Italian department, and one of my favorite professors did a showing of a very famous Italian film, Swept Away, on the weekend. This was an outside-of-class activity, which no one was required to attend, at a college with college-age students. Just we don't have time to watch this in class, so we'll watch it over the weekend in the auditorium. The movie in question would be considered controversial by American standards. By Italian film standards, it's also controversial, but considered a pretty important film for anyone studying film. It deals with some pretty intense issues involving dynamics between men and women, wealthy and poor, as well as, depending on your interpretation, a unspeakable act scene. I was working in the department when we did this movie showing, so I got a front row view of it blowing up. Apparently some freshmen, who were 18 years old, attended the screening and complained to their parents, who then complained to the school in turn. The school decided the best option was to fire my professor. The Italian department went to bat for him, reminding the school that adult students attended that screening voluntarily. The school knew they couldn't get away with firing him specifically for that, so at the end of the quarter they revoked his contract renewal. He was supposed to come back the next year. They did this for lifestyle choices that conflict with university standards. Dumb move. I don't know who on the university's legal team wrote it that way, but they should be fired. The professor in question was Pakistani and openly gay, living with his husband. As far as I understand it, he took their butts to court for discriminatory dismissal. They settled out of court for an unknown sum, but it was enough that my professor and his husband moved to Italy, where he now works at a university there and is very happy. No one outside of the Italian department knew what happened. Professor was there one quarter and gone the next with no warning whatsoever. I used to be a custodian at a prominent university, and one of the teacher assistants in the art department would routinely leave her studio a pigsty and then assured her students, "Not to sweat the mess, we're just giving the janitor something to do." A number of students complained about her sense of entitlement, and she was rejected for a professorship for calling me a janitor instead of the proper nomenclature, custodian. Grad students are treated like trash. We're cheap labor, so the tenured professors can keep publishing without doing anything, and the professors looking for tenure can get the publications they need. Basically, the entire publish or perish culture in academia is really toxic. Unless you get lucky with a nice advisor, you're screwed. Also, university administration cares nothing for graduate students. At my school, our president announced a cash appreciation gift to every staff person making under a certain amount. Every graduate student on campus thought that included them as well, because according to every logical person, we're staff eligible for benefits and we work full-time. Nope, we're only students when it's convenient for the university and makes their numbers look good, and we're considered staff only because we're getting paid barely above the poverty line. At least I get health insurance, I guess? Oh, and my source, grad student who was once all bright-eyed and excited about academia, but it's a toxic place. Apparently, there were quite a few rich kids who didn't study, go to class, contribute, or maintain a GPA above a 3.0, whose parents shockingly paid for them to get into those schools. Say it isn't so! Academia sometimes draws ridiculous people. I had a dean once who caused so much turmoil so often by simply denying objective reality when it didn't suit her. I remember spearheading a project to repurpose a section of our building. I got the plans and she refused to believe the blueprints on square footage. So I measured it myself. She pretended it wasn't the case, that it wasn't large enough to accommodate its new purpose, but according to her, it was because in her mind it was 30% larger. I went over her head and ended up in meetings with higher administration, trying to get them to understand. They all took her side. She proceeded to make my life hell for the remainder of my time at the university. It's often speculated or rumored that university professors are sometimes attracted to their students. But it can work the other way, as was the case with me when I was teaching music history. One female student sat as close as she could get, followed me around and was always doing extra things to win favor, to the point where it became obvious to her peers. Rather than embarrass this student by discussing it with her directly, or fellow staff members and the dean, I patiently wound her down gradually over time until she eventually got the idea that nothing would come of it.
D&D players of Reddit, what is the most creative character you've seen someone play as? I once kidnapped a player character wizard and replaced them with a high-level illusion created by the BBEG. The player then had to control the illusion from the perspective of the BBEG. That's Big Bad Evil Guy, pretending to still be a member of the party. It was surprisingly effective. Just as they reached the BBEG, they were slowly realizing he wasn't helping much anymore. I played as a Wemmick back in college, and I loved that character. He was a druid, and thus could only carry wooden weapons. So, after thinking about it, I gave him a lance, and then proceeded to get every feat you could for a knight on horseback. Trample, charges, etc. I leveled like a monster class instead of a player class, aka slow as snails, but man, it was a hella fun character. He could do some insane damage by the end of the game, and if he had to get into close combat, he could do rake, bite for damage. My favorite part, though, were his two animal companions. The first was a weasel that took levels of thief. So it was our trap dismantler and eventually had vorpal front teeth, so it had a devastating bite attack. The second was, and I'm not kidding, a giant white blood cell. It had been magicked out of a giant and made even larger, and it rode around on my druid's back. As the group's healer, it would blob onto them and heal them with a few levels of cleric. Mind you, my druid was teamed up with the lizardman barbarian, who was surprisingly smart, and the fey bard that would drink anything put in front of him, which is how he ended up as a half-elf woman of a different alignment by the end of the game. The fey had a long-standing thing about drinking anything put in front of him. The campaign was heading to a big showdown between our ragtag group and what we thought was a terrible wizard, As it turned out, she was a high-level alchemist and had been using her potions to do much of her deeds. Unfortunately, when she was gone, all of her potions were sitting there and the Fade decided, why not? Then panicked when he changed gender and drank something else, then another, and kept rolling hysterically on this table the DM had whipped up. A camel. Not just any camel, but a racing camel named Rocket Boots. We had a party member who was inconsistent about showing up for the games, and he showed up in the middle of a short campaign we were running after we had received a stolen racing camel. It's hard to say exactly what it was, but the guy went ham role-playing this camel, making camel noises and doing camel things. It was absolutely hilarious. I haven't done it yet, but I've always wanted to play as a true polymorphed chair. The chair was turned into a human, or any player race, and then started learning, maybe becoming a wizard himself. I don't know how anyone would ever know since the change becomes permanent, but if he ever walked through an anti-magic field, he would just turn back into a chair and be gone forever, and no one else would walk through there for fear of being turned into a chair. I played with a 100% randomly generated character. I had a decent combo of class and race, half elf and ranger, but my stats were completely dysfunctional for a ranger. My worst stats by far were dex and wisdom. In fact, they were the worst in the group. I was the ranger that could do everything a ranger was not supposed to do, and nothing that a ranger was actually supposed to do. For one campaign, I played a gnome illusionist and put all the points into alchemy. With my starting gold, which the DM gave us way too much, and few limitations, I bought a riding dog, 2 saddlebags of holding, and then another for my own carrying. I spent the rest of my gold on all the mundane gear you could possibly imagine. I used a spreadsheet to track it because the DM was irritated. I had 3 years of food and water, 3 tents, 10 cots, a collapsible bathtub, gnome-sized, everyone else can bring their own, a collapsible chair and desk for scribing scrolls, a portable alchemist lab, all manner of rope, poles, tools, containers, and even a few weapons. I packed trail cakes, fine wine, and a few pounds of honey. I think the only other magic items I took besides the bag of holding was a firestone. Don't recall the exact name, but it produced a fire from small campfire up to huge bonfire and renewed the item after 8 hours or so. I wish that campaign had gone on longer. I really enjoyed pulling random stuff out of my bag and then making the DM refer to the printed copy I had handed him 2 weeks ago, showing that yes, I did in fact have half a pound of marbles. Well, at least you didn't lose them. Yeah, I gotta go. Bye-bye. My current campaign is made entirely from players who are new to D&D, myself included. So in building characters, my friend rolled mostly average stats, with the exception of intelligence, so he has a -3 in that. So we basically determined that he's illiterate. During our campaign, he also referred to the DM as God as a joke, and he kept asking questions like, "All right, God, what do we do about this?" So I made a joke that it looks like his character is actually communicating with God on a regular basis, but everyone around him just thinks he's insane and will never believe him. He then got the personality trait, Divine Guidance, which allows him to have a helpful hint once per campaign session. So canonically, his character can communicate with God, but to everyone else, he's just talking to himself as a result of his intellectual ineptitude. In plain English, a monk who fought everything by punching it repeatedly in the privates, Pathfinder monk with the maneuver master archetype who spammed dirty trick maneuvers. The look on the DM was priceless when they read the rules. Here's how it went. I tripped the tiger. Okay. Rolls the dice. Yep, the tiger's now prone. I elbow dropped the tiger in his fierce privates. Okay, so a regular unarmed strike. Oh, no. There are rules for that. No, there aren't. I beg to differ. The rules are this. You can attempt to hinder a foe in melee as a standard action. This maneuver covers any sort of situational attack that imposes a penalty on a foe for a short period of time. Examples include kicking sand into an opponent's face to blind him, pulling enemies' pants down to have his speed, or hitting a foe in a sensitive spot to make him sickened for a round.
Huh. I guess you can punch the tiger in the privates.
All the fights went from epic fantasy battles to this monk pocket sanding, private punching, and pantsing his way through every enemy. I don't know if there are any Joy Quest fans that are listeners to these kind of videos, but I was the dungeon master for Joy Quest, and I actually had a very similar situation to this. One of the players played literally as Jackie Chan, but he kind of named himself as like Jackie Chan. He actually had to fiddle around with this as well by implementing the way of the open hand in scenarios that weren't combat. So arm wrestling. So in one of the episodes, he actually tried to do like a bunch of different dexterity checks, and he tried to like slime and gum up his hands with a bunch of spit or some spilled ale, and basically try to cheat his way to the prize. Players. I've got a friend who is a weird character machine. Most recently is an orc named Sterog who believes that weapons are a coward's weapon, and beats people to their end with his shields. Before that was Robert the Destroyer, a barbarian who threw ladders at people. There was $3.50, or $3.50 to his friends, a really creepy monk who could shoot vines out of his hands like Spider-Man. Villigamish, a 5e warlock who halfway through a random goblin encounter realized he was terminating them for no reason and became a staunch defender of goblin rights. Harold the Great and Powerful was a bard who was absolutely useless, but invested everything in bluff and insisted he was a high-level wizard. Also had a penchant for buying people's souls and then pushing them towards positions of power. The Bear Witch Project, aka BWIP, or Bruce Berner, was a lycanthrope witch that spent most of his time in half-bear form. When asked what his gut feelings were on a topic, he responded with, "I have many feelings on guts." And of course, Justin Chandler, a shaman who saved literally all his gold till level 7, then used it to permanently enlarge and awaken his pet frog and deck it out with sweet gear. A player made a dwarf who was actually a very small human raised by dwarves. He was a barbarian and was modeled after Macho Man Randy Savage. He had a pet Wolverine, which he would throw at people screaming, "The fastball special!" The Wolverine didn't last too long. Randy, throughout the campaign, slowly went insane due to his fear of magic. Randy then began cutting people's hands off for no apparent reason, and the legend of Macho Man ended when he attempted to suplex a dragon. Suplexing a dragon. I mean, this sounds like an epic tale if you think about it. Just like this little man's like walking up this huge like ancient dragon just, "Mere mortals, they feared me for thousands of years. What will you do?" "I'll do like I always do. I'm gonna go in for that suplex. You need yourself a Slim Jim." And then unfortunately it's crushed. Wow, what a tale. It's been a long time, but as I remember it, my buddy was using Middle-earth as the setting. My character was an elf with polymorph abilities, hung out in Mirkwood, and while transformed as various woodland creatures, spied on passerby on behalf of Gladriel. Spending 100+ years in Mirkwood changed her into something a bit more enty. Not physically, just personality. Lazy. Likes to talk about trees. At this point, I wasn't tainted with min-maxing or metagaming, so I was more than content to make this weird, awesome elven forest woman with no social or combat skills and send her into an adventure based on subterfuge, navigating deserts, and combat. I was also interested in making an elven woman who wasn't the Tolkien archetype. More awkward, homely, blunt, super into trees and tree stuff, and not the usual, "let's make dope skyscrapers out of these redwoods" way, but more like, "let me tell you which tree sap tastes best right off the bark." So she ended up being whisked away, reassigned to an adventure in the east past Mordor, in a desert where, according to the DM, Tolkien's mentioned in only one paragraph, blue wizards were hiding. She was very upset with her reassignment. Over the course of the adventure, because wizards, she got stuck as a parrot, rode another character's shoulders. Perfect disguise. Lots of scouting, lots of complaining about not being a Mirkwood, and also being a parrot. Many Mirkwood facts, Mirkwood reminiscences, drawing maps of Mirkwood in the sand with a talon. The entire time, I had her advising the party that returning to Mirkwood would be the best option. That said, when the enemy least expected it, BAM! Sleep mist and trash talk punctuated with WAX! Surprisingly effective. We never finished the campaign, so I like to imagine she just abandoned them at some point, and there's a colorful parrot flying happily around Mirkwood, perching on a character who's actually from Mirkwood, not Treebeard, who I've been reminded is from Fangorn. See, all I know is Mirkwood squawk, nothing else. It was fun to think about this again after all this time. Now I'm probably going to remake her as an important NPC in my new wilderness adventure-based campaign. I don't know why, but for some reason when I imagine this very chill elven woman who's just so attached to the forest, whenever she's in this parrot form, I just picture Iago. So can you imagine that change between just hello, I am an old elven woman here to guide you on your path back to Mirkwood to, hey, you know what? I don't like being a parrot. This is ridiculous. Hey, let's go back to Mirkwood and check out the tree bark, huh? Blah! I once played a game where the players did not know any of their stats. Everything was run by descriptions like, you're really good at getting into places that you shouldn't. Picklock skill, or you're bleeding from several wounds and are nearly at death's door. If it were that kind of game, the players wouldn't necessarily know where they were. By the way, it was the best campaign I'd ever been a part of. The GM was a freaking genius. We were in the Marines together, and he got orders to go to Korea. When he came back, he no longer played and wouldn't associate with us nerds anymore. Dude was a natural, and I never found out just what happened. All I know is he didn't find religion, as suggested. I think he was met with anti-nerd peer pressure, which is funny because the nerds were also Marines, so there it is. A thief with one level of illusionist that passed himself off as an arch-wizard, throwing fireballs and screaming, "These beasts are immune to magic!" Ooh! In a fight, which was a funny experience. He was good at scamming NPCs, though. My character is similar to that, a thief that pretends that what he does is all magic. We were supposed to be infiltrating a cult that was gathering a presence in this town. The other people in my party joined the guard, and I was going to investigate the city's criminal underworld. And then I got distracted and ended up convincing a bunch of people of my magical power and how I can make them as good as me. So I became the kingpin of the criminal element in the city. It ended up not helping us find the cultists at all. But when we found them, I had an army. A necromancer who thought they were a cleric. Only the player and DM knew and had a list translating what the player said they were doing and what they were actually doing, i.e. spells, daily prep, so the others wouldn't catch on out of character. In his formative years, he came upon a book of forbidden spells. Being young and stupid, he assumed it was a book of divine rituals. Fast forward several years, and he wanders the land preaching about the everlasting life. He's skilled in first aid and potions because not every scrape requires divine intervention, but has some spells that will bring someone back from the brink of death. He also has a bodyguard who wears full plate armor, who follows him around because he owes a life debt. Doesn't talk much, though. The other players never discussed removing their own armor, or eating, or using the bathroom, so nobody found it odd that the NPC never did. The other players also never took points in Knowledge Arcane to discover the spell effects that didn't match what they should. Unfortunately, he got found out when one of the party members went down, and he turned them into a zombie. The players were then in on the joke and weren't able to separate what they knew and what their characters knew, which is why they weren't told from the start. If the party member hadn't gone down, there was a plan to have a personal quest, in a trial of faith style, to see if he could unintentionally turn himself into a lich, and if the party would help him do so. Mimic companions are what made me fall in love with the concept of tabletops and random chance. Just messing around with a friend of mine, he happened upon a mimic, fed it a live fairy that was annoying him, and it became his friend for life. That mimic NPC rolled natural 20s like it was his freaking job, and honestly, single-handedly carried the party, with a bit of help from a sentient severed goblin hand, for the rest of the series. All the players had terrible rolls for hours, and just sat in wonder while Mimic and Handy wrecked a Lich Dragon. All hail the mighty luggage. There was a campaign where the party came across a magical cauldron filled with boiling gold. They were told they could drop an item in and it would be turned to gold while retaining all of its other properties and be imbued with intelligence. They were warned that the said intelligence might be malevolent. While the party debated what to drop in, the gnome rogue jumps in. He became gold-coated, which increased his armor class significantly, but also became cursed with an evil alter ego. There was much rolling to determine when and for how long he was forced to play as chaotic evil. I played a human fighter. He was a carpenter, had a wife and children. He was a really kind man, so kind in fact, he didn't carry a weapon. He was non-violent. His flaw, however, was that he had a massive malignant brain tumor pressing on his amygdala. Since they didn't have CAT scans in this universe, no one knew that he had inoperable brain cancer. Whenever our party was in a situation that caused great stress, like combat for example, my character would slip into a sort of trance and go on a rampage in the battlefield. He was absolutely stacked in combat, so he would absolutely clean the hell up when it hit the fan. The gentle carpenter would turn into a snarling, mumbling maniac who royally crapped on anyone who dared oppose him. He would come out of the trance with no memory of the fighting. Since he didn't carry a weapon, this required some creativity, so I made my character a master of improvised weaponry. Before combat, I would ask the DM if there was anything in the room I could lift above my head. Whatever was nearest is what I used as a weapon. Chair, stones, dead enemy's femur, you name it. My character was a whirlwind of bottles, debris, and the occasional small animal. A true force to be reckoned with. His name was Buin the Machine Rodriguez. Buin? I mean, I'm still invested. This is a very cool character concept. Kind of like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde scenario, but like with like actual medical knowledge behind it. But the name Buin throws me off. Is that like a short term for like brain, I guess? But I just can't help to be like, my name is Buin the Machine Rodriguez. So, you want me to use my fists, huh?
Students of Reddit, what's the story of the worst teacher you ever had? Had a science teacher that insisted cells were not made of atoms, and that therefore either leaves weren't alive or diamonds were. When I was at primary school, for ages I think around 7 or 8 till 11 in the UK, we had a class on human reproduction education. A kid asked the teacher about female eggs and how that works, only for her to scream at him that women do not have eggs and not to be stupid. Screw you, Brighton Junior School. This was about my class in the 9th grade. We were about 15 or 16 then. We had chemistry and we were learning about atoms and molecules. Almost everyone in class thought there was a molecule for everything, like a strawberry molecule for example. Then when I pointed out that they must have misunderstood it all, they acted like I was dumb or something. Look at stupid Brenda over here doesn't understand that there's a strawberry molecule. I had a math teacher who would leave the class to ask another teacher how to do certain math problems. Sometimes he'd be gone as long as 30 minutes during a 50-minute class period. Suffice to say, no one in that class learned much math. If it makes you feel any better, the teacher probably was given the class against his wishes. Math classes are often very hard to fill, particularly since they are a challenging set of skills for not much pay, compared to other opportunities. As such, schools sometimes ask unqualified people to teach math class because they need someone. I can confirm, I was supposed to teach math one year, and the school called me on a Friday before school started and informed me that they needed me to teach science instead, and if I could please come in over the weekend to set up my lab. Do you know how much prep should go into a successful year of science? You basically should set up your curriculum in advance, plan out all the lab exercises, lobby your school for the money, and order all the supplies. You can't just walk in and wing a year of science with 130 kids when you've never taught the subject before. As you can tell, I'm not bitter at all. All of these stories remind me of how bad substitute teachers are. Like, I think my old high school just got random people off the streets to teach. I once had a sub who wore doctor's hairnets over his shoes and asked me what I wanted to be in life. When I said I wanted to make films, he laughed in my face and said, "That's not happening." Education is a joke in the States. My English lit professor was late to class every day. She was clearly on substances. On top of that, she didn't even shower. Her hair was matted, and she was so rude. She gave us homework and never took it up or graded it, and then would show up and say it's test day with no warning. I had to drop the class after I failed the first test. I believe most of the class dropped after that exam as well, and she didn't come back next semester. I mean, if she was on substances, then clearly the English class was pretty lit. One time while taking an exam in my Calculus 2 class, I got a random bloody nose that dripped right onto the test. After explaining what happened, my teacher said if I leave the room to go clean up, I wouldn't be able to retake the test. My options were to grab another test and start over halfway through without being able to copy my previous answers, or leave and fail the exam. I walked out of the classroom and withdrew before I even got to my car. You should have bled all over the test and handed it in. And with that evidence, if they kept it, went to the dean or someone else in administration. I have steady nosebleeds of up to a minute every now and then, and that's while lying down. I honestly couldn't take the chance of continuing to write while I bled for just a gotcha moment with a jerk teacher. FYI, as a nosebleeder myself, don't lay down when you got one. In case you didn't know, tilting your head back is also a lie. Both things just make it worse. This is about my Welsh professor. She assigned textbooks that were out of print, couldn't explain anything to save her life, responded to questions by repeating herself, and her syllabus was just header info and a single line that said, "The purpose of this class is to learn Welsh." In the second grade, had a cool girl named Deja in my class. Our class made a joke where we'd say Deja and then boo in a loud and deep voice. The teacher was super ticked off and took Deja's bag, the rectangular one with the 2 metal bars on the back, and slammed it against her back. I heard the most blood-curdling scream of all time, and the whole class just fell silent. I don't know what happened to the teacher since that was near the end of the year and I moved away after that school year ended, for unrelated purposes. The teacher physically assaulted Deja because y'all made a joke about her name? Holy freak. Yeah, I felt so bad for Deja, and the memory keeps coming back to me sometimes. I don't know why I think about it, I just do. Hearing that story made me really think that I probably would have taken part in that joke, because saying deja vu sounds kinda cool. But I could see how it would suck if you didn't like the joke. I was once humiliated by my teacher because the guy I had a crush on was in another class, came into our classroom to ask my teacher something. A lot of my classmates started giggling, and one of them called my name for several desks away, as if I possibly didn't notice that my crush had entered the room. I was the one that ended up getting in trouble, and the teacher threatened to send me into my crush's class and have everyone laugh at me, even though I hadn't said or done anything besides go bright red. My bad for having friends who knew I liked a boy, I guess. Not saying what happened was right, but I'm embarrassed as freak by everyone's behavior. I wouldn't wish any aspect of this situation on anybody, but God, that teacher hated me. This was a gym teacher. The other kids would often bully me and sometimes beat me up. She would only intervene if I fought back, and that was to punish me and me alone. I went to the guidance counselor one time after getting kicked out and told him what happened. He called her and she said I was the one attacking them and they did nothing, since she was the teacher and I was the student. You can guess who the guidance counselor believed. This was my entire elementary school life. I could have 6 jerks pushing me around, calling me names, hitting me, trying to pants me, etc. That's all fine. Throw one punch and break their nose, detention for a week. Literally had the exact same thing happen to me as well. I would get ISS, in-school suspension, and the other girl would get nothing. I am also a girl, but I was a very tall 12-year-old. So whenever I would fight back, they would assume I caused more damage, even though I was the one being picked on and did not start the fight and was only defending myself. Years later, my mom said they wanted to permanently suspend me, but she threatened to sue them since they admitted to her that I was the one being bullied and couldn't do anything about it in writing. Good thing though is the ISS teacher was very nice to me and would let me do whatever I wanted as long as I did all my homework and stayed quiet. Got a lot of good quality reading done. I had the opposite effect with teachers in school. Every time I was about to get into a fight, one magically appeared. I remembered one time I was in gym and this kid was walking up to me, ready to fight me, and my math teacher showed up out of nowhere and stopped us. It's like she had instant transmission. A teacher once told me that sand was a liquid because you could pour it. I then raised my hand and told her that if you had enough big containers, you could pour bowling balls. The class laughed, and about 10 minutes later I sneezed. She thought I said BS and sent me to the principal's office. The worst teacher I ever had was my shop/gym teacher in high school. He would not do anything at all. I was able to smoke in shop class and in gym as long as I was outside running laps or something. I never once heard him tell anyone about safety measures when using shop equipment. A few people got hurt, and one actually lost half a thumb, but the worst thing he ever did was hire some of the grade 9 and grade 10 girls to babysit for him and his wife. He would leave his wife at the bar and go home to check on the kids, and was eventually caught hooking up with one of them. After a police investigation, they found a ton of homemade content on his laptop of him hooking up with these girls. Last I heard, he went to jail for life. This was all in a town of less than 300 people. Similar thing happened to a hall monitor I knew. Dude went on to be a coach at another school and was apparently doing pretty well. Threw it all away because he started to date a student. What an idiot. In the 5th grade, I had a teacher who disliked me because I was bullied a lot and she had to take care of it and talk to my parents a lot. One day I was playing kickball and got borderline assaulted by some kids, and she saw, came over, and let them go inside. She looked at me covered in dirt and said, "Don't go telling your dad about this." Next day, my dad went into the school and had a very long talk with this teacher and the principal. I'm pretty sure she was hoping the school year would end sooner. Damn, I had the same teacher in the same grade who would never stop screaming at one student named Nate. I ended up kind of becoming friends with him, but didn't see him much after 7th grade. It got to the point where it seemed like she would go out of her way to find some reason to scream at him. She even screamed at him when some student smuggled a staple gun into the lunchroom and began firing it at Nate, claiming he was doing horseplay or something. The kid with the staple gun got away scot-free. Same kid also hit me with the rubber band next year until I almost cursed. Luckily, my teacher was really friendly and said, "Well, I would have too. That really hurts." I had a computer science teacher who didn't really teach the class. First day of school, he stood up and said, "I'm going to be honest with you guys. We're going to be learning this material together." He then pushed us all into online code camps. The beginning of every class, he also spent about the first 20 minutes going over anything under the sun except for programming. If your phone went off at any point during class, he said that you had to buy the entire class donuts, but he was exempt from this rule. My programming teacher also had similar teaching strategies. The first day he said, "You guys will just be learning on codes and I'm gonna monitor you." He then proceeded to play the Winnie the Pooh baseball video game every class, even promising kids A's if they could beat it on the hardest difficulty, as the rest of us struggled to actually program. First off, where can I play Winnie the Pooh baseball, because I always hear about that game? And secondly, my economics teacher in college had the same rule about donuts. His phone actually went off once and the whole class was like, "Ooh," and he bought us donuts the next class. It was awesome. Some crazy substitute we had for geography hit the computer monitor to the floor because of a fly. It landed beside me and I nudged it off with my paper. My elbow knocked the dictionary off the table and I was, and I quote, "isolated from class for throwing a dictionary across the room." I was pissed off. When I was in kindergarten, my first teacher got pregnant, so she had to take maternity leave. She then got replaced with a substitute teacher to teach my class for the rest of the school year. She was very strict and she was not very nice. I had issues with her, but I was a very good student, quiet and to myself. One day I asked her that I had to use the bathroom, but she refused to let me go. I really had to go, but ended up peeing myself. I remember going to the nurse and they called my mom. My mom went to the school and had a meeting with the teacher, the principal, and someone else. 2 days later, that teacher was fired. At least she didn't do the, "I don't know, can you?" bit when you asked to go to the bathroom. Every time a teacher did that, I wish I peed myself. I remember my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Doge, being super strict. She was pregnant and took maternity leave. The substitute was the nicest teacher ever, and she was appalled that Mrs. Doge had never read us a single book. When I was in the 9th grade, the school I went to could not afford enough books for everyone in the English classes to have a copy to take home. They only had like 30 copies and they had like 4 classes of 25 students. So what they did was have us read in class. But rather than have each of us read to ourselves, the teacher read to us. I think this was because they wanted the entire class to be at the same place in the book. This was the 9th grade. It was a little insulting, in my opinion, to have the teacher read to us. The teacher quickly realized that it's no fun reading the same chapter to 25 students 4 times a day. So she brought a tape recorder and would record herself reading to the first class. The 3 other classes got to sit there and listen to the recording of her reading the chapter while she sat at her desk doing God knows what. I've never been one of those who liked wasting time, so I went to the library and checked out a copy of whatever book we were reading and would read it at home. I would finish it in a couple of nights, whereas it would take a week or more to have it read to us in class. The English class was my second to last class of the day, so I would use that time to do homework from my other classes that day. Ideally, not to have any work to do after school. An English teacher I had in high school asked the class to spend half of the class in the library, finding a love poem. I chose Sonnet 130 by Shakespeare. It's not your standard love poem. It says nothing nice about the lady until the very end. She failed me on the project. The very next project was to choose a poem that described our general feelings around the time. I chose a poem from the Existentialists. I don't recall exactly which one, but it was about bad thoughts, if you catch my drift. Again, I failed the project. I never forgot her response after I read it aloud. "Why would you choose something so awful and sad?" A girl in the class said, "Maybe that's how he feels." She sent me to the principal's office for punishment. By the end of that year, I was in the mental hospital for acting on those bad thoughts. I was there for 3 months. I feel bad for the OP in this story. I had an English teacher that failed me because I used the words explosions in the sky for a poem, and she told me I plagiarized because that was the name of a band. My next poem was about how my English teacher sucked, and I got a passing grade. I was so confused. In middle school, I'm in college now, I had the displeasure of experiencing a married math/humanities teacher duo who were horrible people and took their relationship issues out on their students. The math teacher was just extremely freaking weird and would go on strange rants, scream, and clip her toenails in class, and clip her nails in class. This happened during a test once. The only sound that could be heard was pencil scratching and the clipping of her nails. I still remember it and shudder. She also made up ridiculously hard to follow technical rules about formatting that would ruin your grade and even put you in detention if you didn't follow them correctly, like drawing the exact margins on homework, boxing answers, and getting all of your work signed by a parent. I was a good kid, but went to detention for the first time that year. Eventually, half the class was in and out of detention every week. Worst of all, she seemed to single out her students to torment at random. I, a small, shy, emo Hispanic girl, was her favorite target. I remember her once yelling at me in class to the point of making me cry for fidgeting with my eraser. She described it as playing with dirt. She brought it up relentlessly in class for a month, calling me dirty in front of my classmates. The worst thing is that when she saw my friend eating a cookie in the hall, for some reason, she absolutely flipped her lid and tried to force her to spit the cookie into her hand because eating in the hall was not allowed, a rule that was never enforced. My friend apologized but naturally refused, swallowing the cookie that was already in her mouth, and thought that was that. The teacher continued to scream at her, got her detention, and tried to get her suspended. Her husband was the humanities teacher. Think history, current events, and social studies. He was, to put it lightly, a blatant racist. When we talked about the Holocaust or the slave trade, he would ham-fistedly point out the Jewish or black kids in the class and basically be like, "Just like your ancestors," and keep bringing up the kids as examples despite clearly making them uncomfortable. This wasn't even the most blatantly offensive part. During parent-teacher conferences, he literally told my mom, an immigrant, and myself to our faces that I was late and often valued socialization over hard work because I was a Latina. He said something along the lines of, "Just because it's okay in your culture doesn't make it okay here. I taught in Costa Rica once. I should know." I was a meticulous worker who would chat with friends here and there, but not excessively, which of course wasn't the most messed up part about his statement. Me and my mother were speechless, and she didn't say anything, but there was tears in her eyes, and she was understandably mortified and angry. His words hurt me, but it hurt most of all to see her like that and feel so helpless. They both continuously berated me in class and gave me unreasonably bad grades. I was a quiet, extremely shy, hardworking kid, known for being a bit of a goody two-shoes. Before their classes, I never had any academic difficulty, and humanities was my favorite subject. After a while, I shrunk completely. I stopped trying in both of their classes. I was so ashamed, frustrated, and scared of them. My already low self-esteem dropped considerably, and my anxiety in the class situations worsened. Although I consider myself to be quite intelligent and was able to still get A's after their classes, all throughout high school, I retained any aversion to speaking to my teachers and contributing in class, causing my academic life to suffer quite a bit. So Mr. and Mrs. Penn, F you, and I'm glad you got fired and divorced. I hated teachers like this, and being a kid who spoke up, I often got in trouble. I once told my film teacher that he was ruining people's projects with his input. For example, one kid had this dramatic film that was supposed to end with a murder scene. Our teacher thought it would be better if the guy was tied up and had syrup poured on him. It was the stupidest idea ever. Oh, and he loved adding fart jokes to everything. My second grade teacher was Sister Bridget. She didn't like me at all. One day I was feeling ill, and I asked to use the restroom. She told me I was lying, as she tried to tell me why I was a liar, which led me to vomit all over her shoes. Maybe it was a holy vomit. Okay, maybe not the worst teacher, but definitely the strangest. Mr. Pratt. He was a substitute teacher I had in high school in the 90s. Inner city school, he was an older black dude with a loud mouth. There were a lot of jerk students, though, who always mouthed back to every teacher, which made learning difficult. Mr. Pratt had an odd choice when responding to these kids. Imagine a well-dressed but definitely urban-sounding substitute who, when a student tried to act out, would pull out a freaking puppet, obviously custom-made and looked just like him, suit and all, out of his desk. He would then start berating the student via the puppet. The puppet was called Pratt Daddy, by the way. He would make the student talk to the puppet and apologize. Most didn't. They were laughing and tried to talk over Pratt Daddy, in which case Pratt Daddy, the puppet, would kick them out of class and lock the door. Then the puppet went back into the desk drawer and Mr. Pratt continued his lessons. It was odd. I feel like that is something you would have seen on a sitcom. But Pratt Daddy would have probably hit the students with a stick. My former tutor for year 9, also the art teacher, she refused to take action when somebody created a Snapchat account under my name and sent unclothed images to dozens of people around my school. Shortly after this, I got into a fight because a guy was still pissed about the Snapchat situation and punched me in the jaw when I had a retainer. From this, she decided to secretly send loads of emails to my mother suggesting that I, more than likely, have autism. I have since basically been forced into getting checked up on, only for doctors to confirm that I don't have enough symptoms for a diagnosis. She treated me really poorly in the art lessons and did very little to get involved with me when I reported or got witness being bullied.
How do you subtly duck with people? When my dad was a mechanic, people would come in and describe a noise their car is making. It's kind of going screech. My dad would close his eyes and make them repeat the noise over and over while listening intently, saying, "Keep it up. I think I almost got it." Until they're basically out of breath from all this weird-sounding gibberish coming out of their mouths. Imagine other professions trying to do this. "My God, what's wrong with the engine? We have to get this plane off the ground." "Well, it kind of..." Yeah, spit it out." "Well, it kind of sort of goes like..." I don't know what's going on." Sir, listen. "Yeah?" "You're an idiot." I used to have CCTV monitors in my office at a pretty large store, so I would call different departments and hang up right before they picked up the phone and call them back as soon as they turned around. After a few tries, they would stand and wait for the phone to ring again, but I'd wait until the exact second they turned around. Nobody ever found out who it was. Easily the best entertainment ever. When someone sneezes, I tell them to shut up, and they almost always reply, "Thank you," because they are so used to other people saying, "Bless you." Hi, narrator here. I know it's so short, but it's just the idea. This is so funny. Just shut up. Thank you. Or I wonder what if it got even like more aggressive, just like, achoo! Shut up! Thank you. I work in pathology, and I spend most of my day dictating into a microphone. I keep myself entertained by messing with the ladies in transcription in a myriad of ways. One thing I like to do is pick a random word and slightly mispronounce it all day just to mess with their heads. One time, we received a tube of chapstick, a small tube of toothpaste, and a bottle of skin lotion that the ER had taken out of someone's backside. Not sure if they were a little freaky or just mentally ill. After I dictated that case and described the items, I went to the gift shop and bought the same items and then left them on their desk with a note that said, "No need for these to go to waste." They were confused, but had used the hand lotion. By the time they listened to the dictation, I could hear them shout from down the hall. Also, since I recite a lot of case numbers, anytime a number happens to have 666 in it, I will immediately say, "Mark of the Beast!" and use my phone to play an evil laugh and sounds from hell. On Halloween, I taught myself how to say a couple of sentences backward and then recorded it and played it backwards into the microphone. That one freaked them out a bit. If there is ever a really good joke on Reddit jokes, I will end my dictation for the day by telling the joke to them. I also like to do prank calls. I'm the peanut butter jelly guy. When I'm on a waiting list at a restaurant, I always put the name down as Parpar. About half the people kind of hesitate or look at you weird. Play it straight and just spell it out if that happens. When you're called over the loudspeaker, it sounds like they're stuttering, "Parpar, party of four?" You can also do weird funny names that are just barely believable. Yes, people, obviously not every restaurant says party. Use another name for those. As far as the loudspeaker goes, I mainly use this at a very busy breakfast joint on the weekends. They have outdoor waiting and therefore announce names. It will work for any type of calling out names. I have a pretty good memory when it comes to stories that my friends have told me. So I like to retell their own story to them a year or two later, now starring myself, and see how long it takes for them to catch on. They start off with a look of, "Oh man, I could tell some of the story as soon as he ends this." Then it turns into a look of, "Wait, that's my freaking story." A buddy of mine will randomly wish me happy birthday on Facebook when it's not my birthday. So then a bunch of other people wish me a happy birthday and I have to explain it's not my birthday. This ducker does it every year. A couple of weeks ago, he posted on my wall, "Congratulations, man. I knew you'd land that opportunity. So proud of you." That followed by a couple dozen people asking me what had I accomplished. I had someone whose birthday was a day before mine. At 11:45 p.m., as we ate dinner, I pointed out it was his birthday, and without question, the staff did the song, dance, and clap. At 12:01 a.m., he then told them it was my birthday. The server demanded ID. Then I got a very, very unenergetic song, dance, and clap. I swear, even the cake looked slump. Best proof I ever had that servers hate that crap. Make up a hobby or skill for your friend. Over a period of weeks or months, nonchalantly describe your friend's aptitude at this skill to your common friends or colleagues. If you pick something general enough, your friend will encounter lots of questions and it might snowball. Examples: Dan is a very good artist. He painted this for me. Show them a picture of some art someone else painted. Did you hear Dan won an award for his artistic skills? Dan is actually a really good singer. He sung in that state championships last summer. Did you know Margaret fixes watches? Bonus points if you pick someone you only vaguely know. Then you can deny starting the rumor and blame someone that knows him even better. In public places like malls or grocery stores, I nonchalantly thank random people. I say, "Hey, I saw what you did back there, and I just want to say thanks. That was great. Most people don't appreciate little things like that anymore, but I do." Then walk away. Bonus points if you pat them on the back. I knew a friend that did this once because he lost a bet and went, "I just want to thank you," and awkwardly handed him $5 and walked away. Use a fake name when ordering food for delivery. Use a different name each time, but always use the same number. After a while of doing this, they get a huge list of names. After putting your phone number in whatever system they use, pay cash each time. You can hear them hesitate for a moment as they try to figure out why there are so many names with different last names as well. Usually they'll ask if you're the person that's the most recent on their list. Always say no and give them a brand new name. I also like to use names that sound weird in a fake kind of way but aren't super obvious. Chester Elegante, as an example. At the Varsity Chicken Wings joint nearby Syracuse U, would enter name as Icarus for the announcement, "Icarus, your wings are ready." I used to work in a call center a few years ago. We had to take customers' details and I'd always repeat back to them to make sure they were correct. While I was doing this though, I'd duck with them by saying things like, "Oh, is that K for knife? P for pterodactyl? Yeah?" Good old silent letters. Get them heavily involved in a good conversation while standing and just hand them something. Don't look at it. Keep the conversation going, keep eye contact, and hand them anything, from a tennis ball to a rock you just picked up. Almost every time, they'll grab it without thinking. Works even better if talking and walking. See how much stuff they can hold. Keep looking at a spot a few feet behind them with a worried expression. Look back at them and smile again. Look 3 feet behind them this time. Look a little more scared. Repeat and escalate until they get really uncomfortable and look behind them. It works even though they know you're messing with them. There was one guy in the music department who would always leave his phone on whatever desk he was working at. Every single time I'd walk by, I'd pick it up and move it slightly, no more than 6 inches away, and keep walking. I never took it. I never moved it far. I did this several times a day for several months. Then I stopped. I walked by and instinctively he went to put it back and missed. The look of shock on his face made my life. A family opened this small local theater and we went a couple of times during October and watched Annabelle and Nightmare on Elm Street. After everyone got deep into the movie, the staff would sneak up behind us, dressed in black, and duck with us pretty hard. Their kid crawled as fast as he could down the row seats and rubbed up against our legs. That was the best one. It was freaky, but hella fun. I don't know, man. I think that would be kind of crazy to send your kids into the dark theater to mess with people as they're watching a scary movie. What if somebody stomped their foot down to the child going, "No, not today, Annabelle! Grr!" No, please. I didn't mean to. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Why would you do this? No! Stop! I had a roommate in college that rarely went out to drink, but when he did, he got completely trashed and usually ends up having no recollection what had happened. So whenever we would be drinking together, I'd take a handful of leaves from outside and hide them in his room in places like under his laundry pile, under his bathroom sink, in his jacket pocket, toaster, in the closet, etc. He still thinks he has a leaf hoarding habit whenever he goes out to drink with us. Wait, you had a toaster in your closet? I saw this on another thread. Can't remember the name of the hilarious person who wrote this, but start out with a subtle lisp when talking to someone you usually see on your own and when others aren't likely to be around when you speak to them. Over the coming weeks, make the lisp more prominent until you can barely be understood by that person. When it has become so bad that they cannot at all understand you, just drop it. Start talking normally again. The guy who's been trying to figure out what you're saying will be so confused. If he asked about it completely, deny it. Act baffled each time he brings it up. Bonus points if he starts asking other people. For example, Steve and Jerry, starting with Steve. "Hey, Jerry, you know the guy from accounting?" "Yeah, dude, what about him?" "You've heard his lisp, right? He's not got one anymore." Jerry gives a weird look. Dude, he's never had a lisp. I don't know what you're talking about. Steve will be completely mind-ducked. You could also apply this to having a weird accent that suddenly drops. Not a real accent, just a really weird, unrecognizable accent that nobody can figure out. I really love bananas. I take a couple with me every day to work for mid-morning snacks. I decided to make it a habit of taking a break every time I was eating one to stroll over to a coworker's desk, chat with her while eating, and throw the peel into her garbage bin before walking back to my desk. She would deal with the smell for the rest of the day. It took a week before I got if you throw that in there, I'm gonna end you. I mean, dude, I don't know, I might feel the same. I have a very sensitive nose, and if you're coming over and just dumping your crap into my garbage can that I have to work next to for the whole day and be like, no, that is not a funny prank. That is a disaster. Please don't do this. Please, just no. If you're in a group of people, all of you line up along both sides of an exit. When someone walks out, everyone start clapping and cheering for the person. Some friends and I did this on the subway metro in Singapore while waiting for a train. Some of the reactions are priceless. My one friend and I refer to every animal as kitty, or some variation of it, i.e. wolves are howling moon kitties, meerkats are stand-up kitties, and obviously ferrets are snake kitties. We often ducked with people, like one time when I insisted that this girl's gross dog was a slobber kitty. She was super proud of having this purebred dog, so she was getting quite flustered over the whole thing and practically yelling the breed of her dog at me. The first friend I mentioned walks in after not having heard this argument, and the girl says to him, "You can tell what breed my dog is, right?" And he replies, "Slobber kitty," without missing a beat. She got so mad. Definitely a subtle one, but I like it. I work in a restaurant. As a servant to the public, it's easy to get down on your job. Subtle things really help make you feel less like a backside-kissing peasant. Almost every time I run a tray of food, I make eye contact with the nearest table that's waiting on food and give them a look and smile as if I'm coming right for them to deliver their meal. Then I pass right by them and take it to the actual table. I love when people interrupt their conversation with, "Hey, here's our food." Oh, only to be left disappointed. A little sociopathic, considering most of these people didn't do anything to me, but it's just a nice way to feel in control at a job where you are so often walked on. "It was you! You did this to me! Oh, come on! I've definitely had this happen to me somewhere before. No! Now I know your tricks. Now I know. I'm gonna watch you and bring hey, you get back here. Ah!" I looked after my buddy's house when he was on vacation. I took every photo out of its frame, scanned it, photoshopped me in somewhere, printed them, replaced in frames. Months after he got back, he called me saying his brain was telling him something was wrong, but he rarely looked at the photos anymore, so it didn't click until his sister was over and saw the altered photos. One of my best friends is generally quite impatient, and for the last 8 years, I've been purposefully waiting for the last ring whenever he phones me to answer because I know he hates it. The best part, though, is I periodically tell him every so often that I'm doing something that he hates to duck with him, but I'm not telling him what it is, which drives him nuts as he can't figure it out and often insists I'm lying. I do a bunch of things to mess with him, but this is my fave as it's the longest running, lowest effort, mildest inconvenience that gets maximum annoyance. When we're closing down my store, there's a small vestibule at the back door where we have to stand still for about 20 seconds so that we can arm the motion alarm before leaving. As a rule, no one can be in the store alone, and so some employee always has to be with me for this process. I fart every single time. If they move, then the alarm won't set and we have to stand there even longer. In high school, I would sit in the back with my buddies, and whenever we had a substitute, I would sit completely still with my mouth gaping open until drool started pouring out slowly and dripping all over my notebooks. Sub would have zero idea why someone with such a seemingly debilitating mental handicap was in a regular class. Of course, they were far too uncomfortable to say anything that might suggest something was wrong with me. On a side note, I never did the deed in high school. I was once inspired by a post here on Reddit where someone replaced one of their family portraits with a picture of Vladimir Putin. One day when our parents were at work, my brother and I did the same thing by changing out a picture of ourselves with one of Putin bottle feeding a baby goat. We thought it was inconspicuous enough to go unnoticed for a little while, but we both gave it less than a day before our parents would notice. 6 months later, I'm in the middle of my college semester and I get 2 texts. One from my brother saying, "They found Putin," and the other from my dad saying, "You clever plastard." I used to manage a fleet of company cars. One of my friends who worked with me had a car for my fleet. He doesn't know I had spare keys for all of them. The parking lot is not large. You can fit about 50 cars in it. They're all company cars, and there's no reserved parking. So, being the friendly jerk I am, shortly after he arrived at work, I would go out for my smoke break and move his car over 1 or 2 spots. Sometimes I would even reverse the car back into the same spot, if he went in front first. I shuffled his car around the parking lot every 3rd day for about 4 months straight, but never too far from his initial spot. One day after work, we were at the pub getting a pint. He says to me, "Man, I'm so tired when I get to work. Sometimes I can't even remember where I parked my car." It's been almost 2 years to this day. I still move his car, but I've reduced the frequency to about once a week. He still doesn't know. In my apartment building, there is an unprotected Xfinity Wi-Fi. I have my own Wi-Fi, so I never connect to that one, but for some strange reason, one day, my phone connected to it on its own. So not knowing it did that, I started watching YouTube on my phone and accidentally hit the Chromecast button at the top of the screen. And when I pressed it, it gave me 2 different smart TVs to cast to. I had a huge evil grin on my face. So first, I immediately searched a Rickrolled video and casted it to one of the TVs. I thought this was hilarious, but I wanted to be more clever. I started playing all sorts of different videos. Girl ripping out her hair with a drill while eating corn, 2 frap videos, South Park videos, 4 words all uppercase. Halfway through the last video, the connection ends. I guess they finally figured out how to turn it off. So the next day, I came home from work and checked my mail, and next to all the mailboxes was a very angry letter to the whole building. Really me. Can't remember it word for word, but it said something like, "Whoever the rumpole is putting videos on our TV, please stop! We have young kids, and now they are repeating the inappropriate language that was in those videos." I immediately bust out laughing in the middle of the hallway, and believe me, I will be doing it again. I had a coworker once who was a real jerk. I started making fun of bald customers, to their face in a friendly manner. It was a cigar store. Making light is mandatory, on a frequent enough basis when he was around to make him think I really got grossed out by bald people. I don't, and I think I'm probably going bald. It was all part of my long con. After I got him thinking about baldness on a regular basis, I brought in my shills. I talked to customers I was friends with. Under my instruction, they'd always stare at his hair when they saw him or ask, "Did you get a haircut or something?" Every time they talked to him, we went to the same barber. Neighborhood dude, cut his first cigar. So I talked to the barber into asking him, "So, you want me to do anything about, like the thin parts?" After 6 months of this, he was constantly checking his hair in the mirrors, the glass around the shop, asking all the darn time if I thought he was balding. It was hands down the most sociopathic and impressive thing I have ever done in petty revenge. It was like a total of 9 months of work, involved half my customers and eventually the owner of the store. He had the thickest hair I've ever seen. People complimented him on it, but that jerk farted in my face one time while I was eating quiche, and you don't duck with a man's quiche. Wow. So this man literally went Liam Neeson on this. Like this guy just like walking around and just being dumb, be like, ah, and he just looks up, his quiche ruined. Darn you. I will remember this day. Revenge is best served cold, just like my quiche, which is now cold and smelly.
What film made you say, holy crap, there's still 50 minutes left? The Sound of Music. They get married and I said, that was a nice ending, and my wife says, the Nazis haven't even arrived. Some people don't realize that The Sound of Music actually had an intermission, and they only watched half of the movie. I literally had no idea there was a second VHS tape until this Reddit thread. Maybe we bought it used because I only remember seeing the first half. The Sound of Music had Nazis? I must have only seen the first half as well. Pearl Harbor. There's a climactic attack on Pearl Harbor. It's explosive and tragic, some people getting hurt or worse, and then the movie slows down and keeps going for another hour. Ugh. Pearl Harbor is a 2-hour movie squeezed into 3 hours. Roger Ebert. The Batman. I know people love it, but I found the movie extremely boring and almost fell asleep. The car chase scene was basically him getting stuck in traffic. I've seen more exciting things happen on a Texas highway. If you just watch the trailers, you've basically seen the best parts of the movie. Save yourself the 3 hours. I should also point out, because it might not seem this way, but I love Batman, so this movie was a big letdown for me. I actually enjoyed the Batman up until the scene where he choked down that bomb and walked away with absolutely no injuries, not even the slightest burn on his face. After seeing that, I looked at the remaining time on the movie and noticed there was still almost 2 hours left. You know, that opinion isn't as controversial as the OP might make it seem. I think after Nolan did the realistic Batman in the Dark Knight trilogy, we didn't need to see that again. For me, it's Titanic. Back in the 90s where VHSs were still a thing, Titanic the movie was split between 2 VHS tapes. The first being all about the onboarding and the love story, while the second finally had the iceberg hit and sinking after spending all of what felt like another hour on the love story. I would always doze off before the second VHS tape got entered. My family eventually stopped playing part 1 and we would just go straight to part 2 whenever we decided to watch Titanic again. I will admit that I, then a 13-year-old boy, cried seeing Titanic in the theater. But it was because I drank a Mountain Dew too quickly and didn't want to miss the drawing scene, better than I could have hoped for. And the sinking by getting up to go use the restroom. I was the closest I've ever been to bursting my bladder. Full Metal Jacket, in an excellent way. When I was a kid, my family used to watch this on Laserdisc. I think it's the only movie we had that not only had to flip the disc, but that there was a second disc. I'm pretty sure with the multiple intermissions, this is why my family considers it a Christmas movie. Although my dad claims it's because they sing Happy Birthday to Jesus. Full Metal Jacket, the family Christmas movie that everyone loves. Daft Punk's Electroma. Good freaking God. It was a solid hour of robots walking through the desert. I love Daft Punk, but that film was excruciating even by French film standards. Which is so weird because Interstellar 5555 is totally a masterpiece. As someone who has casually listened to Daft Punk over the years, I had no idea that they had films for their music. I guess that's something I have to look into. Transformers Age of Extinction. That movie was so awful, I never even finished it. Spoiler, Galvatron runs away like a punk and Lockdown gets split in two by Optimus' thick metal rod. Then Optimus flies into space and says he's gonna destroy his creator. My husband won free tickets to that movie. We went to the cinema together. I was actually enjoying it. I found the whole thing ridiculous and not believable, but I enjoyed myself. Then there was a long time of explosions and then the movie ended, I thought. I was like, great, 90 minutes is a good length for a movie. And then they went to freaking China and took another hour to end. It was so incredibly boring, which could have all been avoided if they cut it at the 90-minute mark. The extended version of The Lord of the Rings. I didn't realize how much additional footage there was. It's all amazing though. I've run out of food and there's still 20 days of film left. Please send help. This might get me flamed in the comments, but I've never seen Return of the King, and I saw The Two Towers at a midnight screening and really enjoyed it. Black Adam. I know it was only 2 hours, but to me it felt so much longer. My husband and I thought the same thing. I paused it saying, "God damn, how much longer do we have?" And then we saw it was 2 hours total. Felt like a glitch in the Matrix or something. At one point during Black Adam, I legit thought the movie was over since it had a climax and then there was still like another 30 minutes left. Pirates of the Caribbean: Curse of the Black Pearl. Not in a bad way. I just remember feeling like I was watching the climax and then it just kept going. Would have agreed with the sequels, but I actually thought the first Pirates was a perfect movie. My brother usually quotes Barbossa, Jeffrey Rush, when not wanting to do something. "I'm disinclined to acquiesce to your request. It means no." I prefer, "The code is more like what you call guidelines than actual rules." The Pirates of the Caribbean series are some of my absolute favorite films to watch. They are just straight fun. Gone Girl. In my defense, I know nothing about it and thought it was a rom-com/chick flick. Was going through a toxic divorce at the time and went to see this to take my mind off my troubles. I just sat shell-shocked afterwards. My other movie was World War Z. Near the end, there was this tense scene where he has to walk past one teeth-gnawing zombie. I let out an involuntary and inappropriate laugh at how much it resembled my ex in zombie makeup. It was meant to be a tense scene. Also, when the scientist got scared and ran and tripped down the ramp and shot himself, I was the lone person in the theater who laughed at the sheer absurdity of it. I was on my 3rd date and my GF broke it off because she thought I was a manic. Dude, you're not alone. When he runs back to the ramp and slips and falls and accidentally shoots himself in the face, and Brad Pitt's face had just so much disappointment on it, after they spent like a good 15 minutes building the scientist up as the last hope of humanity, it was hilarious. I've never seen World War Z, but I love a good bad movie. I might have to check this one out. Artificial Intelligence. Man, that movie dragged. And then it finally had the bittersweet ending and I was like, yeah, not my thing, but I can totally see why people like it. And then it went on. That movie was the prime example of the adage that part of knowing how to paint a great masterpiece is knowing when to stop painting. Well, geez, Stanley Kubrick died before filming it. How much harder did you want him to stop? Okay, I'm not gonna lie, that joke made my jaw drop. Hateful Eight. The movie is one long conversation, but in a good way. I love that film. My uncle was in hospice having palliative care with his own room a few years ago. I asked him what his favorite films are, and I downloaded them and put them on a drive. I know what types of films he likes. He was in his 90s and loved westerns and was fine with violence in movies. So I added Hateful Eight. On the night before he died, he told the nurse that he was fine and he was going to bed to watch the rest of this really long film I had given him, which he said was great. The next morning, he got up happy, sat in his chair, and died. Okay, I wasn't expecting a movie scene to come out of this comment section, but as for the long conversation comment, isn't that all Tarantino films? Wonder Woman 1984. Can't believe I'm not seeing this mentioned already. I remember checking how long was left and saying, Jesus Christ, for real? When there was nearly an hour to go. We really enjoyed the first one, so we had a big family movie night, not something we do often, and dragged everyone in to watch the sequel. It was really disappointing. Every film ever since the internet destroyed my attention span. Honestly, one of the best parts of going to a theater is the fact that the social code of the setting forces you to disconnect. It's too easy to check your phone and get distracted by life when you're watching a movie at home. Hell, I've made it through stinkers in a theater I definitely wouldn't have if I was watching them on Netflix or Hulu. I'm looking at you, Jurassic World Dominion. Everything Everywhere All at Once. Once it hit the second half, I had no idea where it was going or how it was going to resolve in a satisfying way. But it did, and is now one of my favorite movies ever. I still want to watch that movie. It looks pretty awesome. Spicy videos after those first 2 minutes. Black Panther: Wakanda Forever. It's just a lot of filler. At least the title of the film is honest. The brand new Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, in a good way. Rented the movie and was blown away early on, and seeing more time had me excited to see it through. Really glad to see DreamWorks doing well, and I recommend for others to watch it. This movie has to be one of the most go-watch word-of-mouth movies in such a long time. I constantly hear people mentioning this movie, and I thought it was going to be something that people would pass over. Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. When Bats and Soups are done fighting, and you know the fight with Doomsday was still going to happen, the name of the movie was the first clue that it was going to be an overly long slog. They could have made the whole Doomsday topic into a separate movie, but nope, gotta combine it with the literal god going against a guy wearing a Coke can. I don't care what anyone says about BVS, it gave me the best Batman fight scene of all time, so I will always stand up for that movie. That Batman was so much more entertaining than realistic Batman. The new Elvis biopic. I wasn't a fan overall, but holy hell, they could have cut 30 to 40 minutes and ended up with the same film. The film had too much dialogue as well, needed a little less conversation and a little bit more action. The only scene I've seen from that film is the "he's white" scene, and it's only because it became a meme on Twitter. Star Trek, the slow motion picture. The Matrix 4, didn't finish it because it was too boring. I had to watch some parts of it again because I literally slept halfway through it, and I'm a Matrix fan. I'll be honest, that movie tried to be so meta, it felt like it was a parody. A History of Violence, in a good way. What seems like an ending to a typical good movie happens about halfway through the runtime. I was really stunned and excited to see where it went next. Twilight, the tree scene almost made me chuck my laptop across the room. They are so terrible that they loop back around to being fun. If you have a group of friends who were really into Twilight in middle school or high school, it forces you to relive your younger cringe self. I thought it couldn't be that bad, surely my early 20s self wasn't that bad. Oh god, the cringe was next level. My friend and I had a great time though, binging the films over a weekend and drinking. I remember that one close family friend that took me to see it in theaters. I think I was 13. Anyways, I remember her sitting there and laughing at how horrible it was, and the teenage me was so offended. I still haven't seen those films, and I'm not sure if I ever will. I do love the lore of these movies inspiring the writer of 50 Shades of Grey though. That Zack Snyder Justice League movie. Was all excited to see it, and then about 2 hours in, I was checking how long I had left. It was about an hour. I never finished it. I think he made a good choice to have it broken into parts that had their own little title screens. It's like going to a theater and having an intermission. Shame it felt like, I might as well get through this, rather than, oh boy, can't wait to find out what happens next. But I'm glad Snyder took out the part where the Flash accidentally motorboats Wonder Woman. You know, the classic scenario that seems to pop up in Whedon movies, or at least in superhero movies. I remember it happening between Bruce Banner and Black Widow in Age of Ultron as well. I will never watch that movie again. After the 2 hour mark, I couldn't believe that there was still 2 hours left. Also, every time Wonder Woman showed up, she went into slow-mo and they played her music. It got so freaking annoying. Thor, Love and Thunder. When we saw how much time was left, we just shut it off. Fun fact, I think Thor Ragnarok is the worst MCU film. I know people won't agree, but when Bruce Banner says he's going to show who he is and then jumps off the plane to bounce off the bridge, I wanted to break my TV. Every character morphed into a child in that film. Gangs of New York. Don't get me wrong, it was a great flick, but holy crap, it dragged on. The Return of the King. It had a lot of endings for all the things it had to wrap up, and I mistakenly bought the extra large Pepsi. I also have to say Lord of the Rings Return of the King. Throw the bloody ring in, Frodo, for God's sake. The whole cinema clapped when he finally did it. When I saw it in theaters, I started gathering up my stuff 4 separate times thinking we were at the end. When it did actually finally end, I just sat there, thinking it must be a trick and I will not be fooled into putting one arm into my coat sleeve again. The Last Jedi. I was ready to leave after the space battle and thought the ships were going down to the Red Sand planet and that was going to be the credit roll. The Casino Planet side quest took forever. I'm one of those people that actually like the film, only because it didn't feel like a repeat of other Star Wars films. In a good way, Saving Private Ryan. The Normandy sequence is like 30 minutes and then the rest of the movie is like 50 minutes. Gladiator had me saying, holy crap, there is only 50 minutes left? He enters the Coliseum in the second half of the movie. I felt like it had just started. I haven't watched the theatrical cut in over a decade now. The extended gives it room to breathe, better justifies the subplots with Lucia and with Maximus's old servant, and doesn't drag because the film already had me wanting more. It also gives context to the "are you not entertained" line when the slave owner says to him, "you're an entertainer" before the fight. Rewatching it for the first time in a long time recently, I found it baffling that they would cut that line when it only adds about a minute to the runtime. "Are you not entertained?" is one of the most iconic lines ever. Me and my friends always throw that out when we have an epic moment in any video game we play. For me, it has to be The Omen from 2006. Not because the movie was bad or terrible. I mean, honestly, I don't remember it being great either. But what happened before I even entered the theater had more entertaining twists than that whole movie. At the time, I wasn't able to legally get into an R-rated movie alone, and I was supposed to watch this movie with a bunch of friends. Well, all of my friends managed to get into the theater and I was still stuck outside. So I asked a random couple if they would be willing to pretend to be my parents. The woman, who was pretty attractive, put her arm around me and helped me get in. Once I was in, I told them thank you, but before I could leave, the guy stopped me and said, "No problem, but I don't want to see you causing any trouble during the movie." And then he flashes his police badge at me. I was just so stunned that a cop just helped me get into an R-rated movie. It was a pretty cool moment and something I definitely remember more than anything in that movie. The Girlfriend Experience. People might not know this film, but it stars this actress named Sasha Grey. People of culture might know who she is. But I went to go see this film at a small art house theater and I was just waiting for the movie to be over because I thought it was so bad. There were moments in this movie where some scenes were completely overexposed and you could barely see the actors. If I'm being honest, I would have had more fun just watching some of Sasha Grey's home movies instead. I didn't know The Girlfriend Experience was a movie. I always thought it was a TV series. The more you know. Sasha Grey might not have made it as an actress, but she's doing pretty well as a Twitch streamer. Any MCU movie after Guardians of the Galaxy Part 1. I'm not sure what happened, but Disney saw the success of that movie and thought, "Everyone loves it because it's funny. Why not make all our characters funny?" And since then, every main character seems like they need to be a comedian, and the term comic relief character has been thrown out the window into a garbage truck, taken to the dump, and had a nuclear bomb dropped on it. I honestly stopped watching the MCU after Endgame because I felt like they were leaning into the comedy over great storytelling. Plus, Endgame just felt like the perfect jumping off point with everything that happened in the movie. 2001: A Space Odyssey. Look, I respect Stanley Kubrick, and this movie was absolutely gorgeous and had a lot of shots that looked perfect, but what even was this movie? I was just so bored the whole time while I was looking at these perfectly shot scenes. The Dark Knight in the best ways. Yup, this is the one. After he finally catches the Joker, it feels like the end, but the film still has ways to go. I remember thinking, wait, it's not done yet? When I first watched it. Yeah, and the scene leading up to the catch is so dramatic and high production, it totally could have passed for a good finale. Pretty much any big superhero movie. They all have this big battle sequence about an hour and a half in, and you go, wow, okay, movie done. And then they have to build up to another, more final battle. I really liked Venom 2 for that reason. 90 minutes, I got in, they did their stuff, and I left. Top Gun Maverick. After seeing them do the real mission and Mav gets shot down, I really thought they were just gonna end it there and finish it in a sequel. But then it just kept going and it was so good. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. The entire movie is amazing, but damn does it take a while. I just felt like that whole movie was stuff almost happening with no payoff until the end. Cruella. Not 50 minutes, but I thought the movie was over when she visited the fountain and delivered the monologue to her mother. Then it still got better. Django Unchained. I really enjoyed the movie, but dear lord, it could have ended like 3 times. This was Tarantino's first movie after the death of his longtime editor. In my honest opinion, his work has taken a notable downturn as a result. I'm down with Django, but Hateful Eight and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood were way too long. Avatar 2. I just wanted to piss, but the movie just dragged on too long. But with that said, the second half was really entertaining, to be fair. Yeah, I was like, dude, Jim, we're all seeing this movie in the theaters with good recliners and fancy drinks. The human bladder is not meant to absorb a pint of IPA and then watch this much water splashing around. I saw this with a friend and my summary of it was this. I felt like I had just watched 2 years of a badly edited TV series in one sitting. I still haven't seen Avatar 2, really don't have any interest. I mean, the first one was basically just Pocahontas and Ferngully mixed together. David Cronenberg's Crash. Play started out packed, then I realized after 30 minutes I was one of a handful of people left watching this messed up movie. When it finished, I was the only one of 3 left in the theater. Wow, that's all I can say. When I first read this, I thought they were talking about the movie Crash that beat out Brokeback Mountain at the Oscars for Best Picture. The Revenant. Gah, I saw that movie in theaters and it was so packed, so I had to sit way too close to the screen. And it gave me such a horrible migraine. So I'm sitting there in this movie that won't end and my head is killing me. If I had been there with my husband, I would have just asked to leave, but we had gone with friends. And we hadn't driven ourselves, so I didn't feel like I could. I was so miserable. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Right after the Phantom destroys New York and Alec Baldwin's friends all die, I thought, okay, we should be wrapping this up in the next 10 minutes. Nope! It was another 30 minutes of slogging through an already boring and lazy story. I had to watch Stanley Kubrick's Spartacus for a college class about 3 years ago, and it was awful. From the sound to the pacing and the 5-minute breaks that were just music and a blank screen, it was just overall a horrible experience. Eyes Wide Shut. Most boring film I've ever seen in my life, and I had to go watch it for a class so I couldn't just stop watching it. I hate that movie. And the jerk who plays only one note on the piano for 20 minutes of this horrible movie.
Cops of Reddit. What's the stupidest thing or crime someone did right in front of you? I worked as a small town sheriff's deputy in a rural country. One night, I was running code to a domestic disturbance at a home a couple miles away. I was cresting a hill and noticed a pair of headlights in my lane of travel on a 2-lane road. I pulled up and noticed a beat-up old yellow pickup truck with the driver's side door open facing me and blocking the road. I then noticed a disheveled-looking man standing in the ditch, sheepishly holding an obviously upset raccoon by the tail. I stepped out of the car and yelled to the man politely, inquiring as to what was happening. He shrugged his shoulders and yelled, "Sorry, forensic Sasquatch," before pitching the raccoon into the bushes. I didn't have time to ask questions, but told him to move the car out of the way so I could get to my domestic. Months later, I ran into the gentleman in town and he introduced himself as the raccoon guy. I asked him what had happened and he told me, "I was driving along and saw 2 raccoons trying to get into the same culvert and they got stuck. I told myself, I'll bet I could grab one of them if I tried, and went and grabbed him by the tail. Ooh, boy, was he sure mad." I asked him what he was planning to do with the raccoon, and he just shrugged and gave me a quizzical look. My roommate was a cop. We were walking home after work. I passed right by the station on my way home, and she'd usually join me. She was still in uniform, badge and all. We passed by a liquor store, and a group of kids surrounded us and asked us to buy them liquor. She said, "How old are you?" They said, 16. That's why we can't buy it ourselves. She asked them after she arrested them why they'd approach a uniformed police officer of all people. Their answer, "We didn't think you were a real cop because you're a woman." Wow! So these children must be very educated. Someone please cue the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme song as they're all just being arrested and handcuffed behind them. Bum, bum, bum. You kids are dumb and you're going to jail. You're going to be in juvie with the record. Oh, geez. So many. Probably the guy who asked me how much illegal substances I wanted to buy. I was in full uniform, but he was looking down, counting the rocks in his palm at night. I laughed and said, "I'll take all of it." He said, "That's going to be like $50 then." As he looked up at me, realizing the error in his ways upon seeing me, he ate them all. He got out of going to jail right then, but got a warrant for destroying evidence and a ride to the hospital to have his stomach pumped. So, kind of worth it for him, I guess. We just went through this literally last time. Bum, bum, bum. You're not going to jail, but you're going to go in the hospital having your stomach pumped because you are stupid. Pardon my Joker laugh there. Driving down a 2-way road, 1 lane each way. Car up ahead of me on my lane makes a U-turn from the curb. He was parked. Then proceeds to swerve towards my lane, driving on the wrong side of the road. I slow down. He honks at me as if I'm in his way. He swerves back to his lane and keeps driving. I stop him ultimately after he hit the curb trying to pull over. Yup, guess who got a DUI? Not a cop, but I was behind the Dumbo who did it in front of the cop. Near my mom's house is a bunch of horse property, so it's normal to see guys go by on their horses. I was behind a black SUV and see a police car parked facing the street. The Dumbo in the SUV slowed down just to veer closer and rev his engine at the horses. One was calm, but the other was freaking out. The cop sirens came on so fast, it surprised me. Guy got his horse under control, and the Dumbo in the SUV got pulled over. I deal with stupid every day at work, but here's one that I always like to tell. Back when I was working gang units, we were in a residential neighborhood in East LA at night. We hear a car do a huge, long burnout, and sounded really close. We turn off our lights and wait for some weapon fire, but never heard any. Just then, a car goes flying by us. We turn on the lights and go after him. He pulls over right away and starts apologizing to us, saying that his foot slipped off the clutch. Yeah, right. A burnout that long and your foot slipped? Turns out, he just broken up with his girlfriend and he went to her house to do the burnout in front of it. Now, the interesting thing about working gangs is we don't do traffic or answer calls unless it is gang-related. We muck with gang members. But we had to stop because of what he did in the neighborhood we were in. Since this guy wasn't a gang member, we were just going to let him go. We hadn't even run his license or even asked for it yet. Now here is where it gets stupid. He looks at us and says, "Can I ask you something before you take me to jail?" My partner and I look at each other, ask him for his ID, and run it. Turns out, he had a $15,000 warrant for his arrest. He was seconds away from going home and ended up in jail that night. Funny thing is, I don't think he ever asked the question. I was military police, and this happened back in 2012. I was doing a routine building check on one of the schools on base. Due to our security posture that day, I was in full battle rattle and had my piece with me at 6'2" and 220 pounds. I am an enormous person with all that body armor and such on. I turn the corner to check the backside of the school and see two teenagers sitting on a picnic table outside one of the doors. Mind you, this is a Saturday, so there's nobody in the building. The kid sees me, a giant wall of weaponry, and immediately throws something under the little PE shed. My first thought was the leaf. We're on a military base, you can't have that crap. So I asked the kid what he just threw, and he immediately starts crying. The girl he was with had such a bewildered look in her face at the sight of him breaking down like that. Admittedly, I was also a bit surprised. The girl was 16 and the guy was 15. She told me that it was just a cigarette, so I made the boy fish it out from under the shed. Sure enough, it was just a Camel Crush cig. Not even broken yet. "Are your parents home?" I asked the boy. He shook his head. You live on base, right? Go smoke these in your dad's garage. It's Saturday anyway. Why are you here in school property? I'm not going to arrest you." Suddenly he stopped crying and started praising me for being the coolest cop ever and thanking me for not bringing him in, as if smoking a cig was a huge deal on a military base full of nuclear weapons. Later that day, coincidentally, also on school building check, I found two 14-year-old boys sitting against the wall eating honeysuckle flower petals. So that was weird. I was out at a client's site to burn some camera footage for the police, and due to the slow DVD burner, I found myself outside having a smoke break with the detective that came to collect it. We were shooting the crap back and forth about the weather when a homeless guy walked up and asked for a light. Duct tape jacket and shoes? Check. Overpowering smell of mold, waste, and burning tires? Check. While I was doing the mental math of, is this guy likely to try a runner with my Zippo in front of a cop? The detective produced a book of matches and told him to keep them. The homeless guy walked 10 feet away to an illegally parked Crown Vic belonging to the cop, sat on the hood, and started emptying his pockets. An illegal substance pipe, 2 Bic lighters, 1 crushed pack of illegal substances, and a handful of plastic baggies. Detective elbowing me and whispering, "He's lucky I have places to be." Finally, the guy found what he was looking for, a pathetic little pinner of an herbal leaf, wedged in the cigarette pack and lit up using one of the lighters. Detective still whispering, "Bet he doesn't even share." I let out a snort, which the homeless guy apparently didn't appreciate. He looked straight at me, then straight at the cop, and the flash would have lost to this 90-pound white dude in duct tape shoes. He was half a block away and around the corner before his rolled-up leaf stopped rolling around on the sidewalk. I was training a rookie. We were the same unit with the same designator, a radio call sign. I called dispatch my police radio. 240 Alpha is what I said, indicating that we, 240 Alpha, were calling dispatch. My rookie was standing directly next to me, like right beside me. He got on the radio and said, 240 Alpha, go ahead. Thinking the dispatcher was calling him. In short, he answered himself on the radio. The dispatcher was confused. I wonder how long they kept him like that after he said what he said. I just want to know if they were just staring at him the whole while.
Oh boy, this isn't good. Dispatcher's gone quiet. What do we do, sir?
I don't know. Why don't you ask him again? And just may I remind you, do you see this piece of paper?
Yeah?
What does it say right there?
240 Alpha. Yeah, I know.
Uh-huh. And do you see the names beneath that?
Well, hey, wait a minute. That's my name. Oh, that's my name.
Yeah, that's your name. My agency is the primary agency responsible for boat patrol in my area. One July weekend, my partner and I are just beginning an afternoon shift on the water when another boater flags us down. We make our way over, expecting them to be having mechanical trouble or something. Nope. 2 guys on board, and the operator tells us he wants us to write him a ticket for his expired registration. Says he was just given a warning last weekend and knew we'd catch him anyway. So, might as well get it over with. Pretty good, right? Not done. Eventually, we put our boat on the lift and get off the water to grab dinner. While eating, we get a call from dispatch that a boater had just called in a complaint about another boat that was operating dangerously and nearly caused an accident. We make our way back there, and sure enough, it's the boat from earlier. Turns out they had asked us to write them a ticket earlier because they thought that would keep us from stopping them later after they had gotten intoxicated. Didn't want that OWI. And still not done. This time, when we stop them, there is an additional person on board, an intoxicated girl that they allow to operate their boat. We check her ID, says she's 22, but can't get a return on it. It's fake. She's underage, and they knew it. Now she's going to jail for OWI, among other things, and they are getting charged with furnishing alcohol to a minor. Good thing they got that registration ticket out of the way earlier. I am completely unsurprised. Just about every boater at the marina I live near are alcoholics that do stupid crap just like this. My mother does security at an abandoned waterfront hotel, and every single freaking time she has to tell half those boaters, abandoned private property for your own safety, there's no trespassing, even though they've been there 15 times before, just because they were too crap-faced last time to remember. And every time they're like, what? Really? No way! Like they can't believe the place is dangerous, even though the place is literally falling in on itself. There was this one guy who would stand on property and talk to her for 5 to 15 minutes, despite being told to leave and getting no reception from her. Then she called 911 after watching him book it from one of the rooms and finding a lab inside. Since she knew him, she was able to point to which boat he lived in, and he was getting arrested. He was like, "But I thought we were cool!" No, not even a little bit. Especially not cover up your illegal substance lab and probably become a felon in the process. Cool. Not a cop, but I saw it happen. I worked at a pretty busy nightclub and I watched a man pick up a woman's purse and walk away with it, out toward the parking lot. I saw him get into the passenger side of a vehicle by himself with the purse. I informed one of the off-duty police officers that we'd hire for security. The officer approached the vehicle and turns his flashlight on to catch the guy in the middle of taking a Snapchat video of himself chugging cheap vodka. Turns out, it was his cousin's purse and he needed the car keys. Stupid thing is it was dollar drink night, so how much was he really even saving? At least he got a good Snapchat out of it. Not a cop, but one day a massive water main burst in town and knocked out a couple streets. They put the cops in the ends to make sure nobody went down them. I was driving on a late afternoon and nobody else was really around, so pretty quiet. A young female cop was standing on the corner when over the road from her, some guy wandering down the street jumps up and starts swinging from the road closure sign and then pulled it down. The look on her face was one of pure, "Are you freaking kidding me right now?" Drove off before anything else happened, but I imagine that went poorly for him. Two of my cousins are in their last year of cop school, so this summer they visited us from the city, and my dad took them fishing at the local lake. Some tourists in an RV were camped illegally. Doesn't bother us locals since it is out of the way, and hadn't had any luck fishing. They saw the catch my dad was carrying and asked if they could buy it. He said he could give it to them for free since we already had dinner. The tourists then gave my dad at least 5 big cartons of cigarettes as payment, and it is almost 100% smuggler goods from the border. My dad turned around and saw my 2 cousins literally sitting on the ground laughing. My partner was writing a ticket while I was documenting the stop via the patrol car's computer. We were on a city street next to a dramatically curved freeway off-ramp. We hear a tremendously loud screeching of brakes and a crashing sound that went on for a few seconds. We turn around and an SUV is on its roof. A tire is rolling across the intersection. We put it out over the air and run over. I looked inside my flashlight and there were multiple bodies all over the SUV. The fire department arrived and cut them out. They were all badly injured and the driver was gone. Drive safe and pay attention, guys. There's a reason my partner was writing a freaking speeding ticket. Not a cop, but was a teenager who did something stupid. My buddy and I were at a stoplight in Princeton, New Jersey, one summer evening, and a town cop pulls up next to us, and for some unknown reason, I turned to my buddy and said, "Hey Dave, put away that illegal substance pipe." Needless to say, we get immediately pulled over and 3 more cops come rolling up. Not hard. We were also 50 yards from the police station. My buddy's car was registered in PA, so it was extra special for the cops. Neither my buddy nor the cops were terribly happy with me that day. After a thorough search of our persons and the car, where nothing illegal was found, the cop turns to me and says, "In the future, you should make sure your hummingbird rump doesn't get in the way of your crocodile mouth." I still laugh about it to this day. This was sometime around 1992. Opposite side of the story, officer pulled me over for driving through downtown with my brights on at 2 a.m. Intoxicated, I reached out to turn them off. As he told me why he pulled me over, I hit my windshield washers instead and sprayed him. He let me go, but he followed me as I drove around the block to drop off a buddy, pulled in behind my friend's car so he can go home. He literally falls out of my car, beer in hand, 6-pack in the other. Lights come on, and the cop gets out and approaches us. Turns out my buddy was his training officer. Lets us both go with the promise that we aren't going anywhere until we sober up. I walked across the street to a friend's place. Cop leaves. Buddy takes off. Not really a cop, but maybe the cop who handled me will remember this story. Picked up Call of Duty at a GameStop, which was quite a drive away from me, and I wasn't too familiar with the area. The main street had a ton of traffic, so I decided to use side streets without looking at my GPS and ended up driving into what looked like an abandoned factory. Had no clue where I was, but I drove slowly past the open gate, which appeared unattended at the moment, and attempted to make a U-turn back out. Right as I'm about to exit, the cop holds out his hand and yells, "Hey you! What do you think you're doing?" I had no clue where I was, but I knew I mucked up. I rolled down the window and the officer, in a very distinct Australian accent, says, "So, you enjoy running stop signs?" Had no clue there was a stop sign, but I didn't make a complete stop, so I just felt a huge fine coming my way. Told him I had no clue where I was and that I was really sorry. I just wanted to play some video games, man. He goes on to tell me that I was in the DWP, Department of Water and Power, and if I drove any further down, the guards were authorized to shoot me and that I could have been terminated since they were on red alert. After he asks me to pull over and check my license plate, make and model, etc., he tells me that they'll send my info to the FBI and look for any infractions or criminal records. None, by the way, but okay. Told him again I was sorry, and dude just kept saying, "Leave, leave, leave." I feel for the man because I'm sure he might have lost his job, but he let me go with a slap on the wrist and my body intact. Got extremely lucky, and now I always use GPS if I'm not at least 75% familiar with the area. Hope he's doing well, I owe him. But I swear something felt off, but in the heat of the moment I was honestly dumbfounded. He seemed more annoyed of me and couldn't wait for me to leave, but I don't really know what was happening on his end. That quote about getting shot at stuck with me as he explicitly told me I'd be terminated. And I don't usually hear cops talk about the FBI investigating, but this is government property, so, I just rolled with it. Also, that Call of Duty died out in a month. It was World War II. Overall, not a worthwhile game. What? That's what you got out of this whole scenario? You were threatened that you were going to get shot by a very angry Australian man who was dressed as a police officer and talking about the FBI and how you could have lost your life. But the last thing that you threw in there is, well, the worst part is that Call of Duty sucked. What? I would say I'm just glad that you're alive. As a teenager, my friend and I were jaywalking. We got to the center divider when a cop drove by, then made a U-turn, and we stupidly started running and ran up into a parking structure. We were on the roof when 3 cop cars came up, surrounded us with weapons drawn, telling us to put our hands up. They asked why we ran, and we said we didn't know, which we really didn't. We just ran. They searched us, and I had some candy in my pocket, which they asked what I was holding. It was gummy bears. They let us go with a warning. I thought I was pretty stupid. Man, how terrible would it be if the cops were like, and we're going to take this under suspicious activity. Make sure that these gummies aren't filled with anything illegal. Yeah. All right, be on your way. Guys, look, I just got free candy. Police officers of Reddit, what was your they could have gotten away with it if they had kept their mouth shut moment? I had a car pass me once where a passenger hangs the upper half of his body out of the passenger side window with his middle finger in the air while screaming, "Muck the police!" He had my attention for the seatbelt violation. I got behind the car and ran the registration. Registration is suspended. Registered owner's driver's license is attached to the registration and his license is suspended. Registered owner also has 2 warrants for retail theft. I stopped the car, and they both started with the free speech thing and how I can't stop them for giving me the fingers, which is 100% correct. When I pointed out that I can, however, stop them for the passenger not wearing a seatbelt and for the registration violation, suddenly they both got quiet. Driver got arrested for suspended license and his warrants, and the passenger got himself a citation. The driver's vehicle got impounded. Moral of the story? Tell your passengers to shut their mouths. Had that guy not been a moron, his buddy would have been homeward bound. Not a cop, but a public defender. Had a client who made a long statement that didn't help her case, but the judge was letting her go without setting bail. Before leaving the courtroom, however, I was informed that the police from another precinct were coming to pick her up, and she'd be held until they did. They didn't get her until much later, but I told her to absolutely not say anything to them, to keep her mouth shut. The next day I go to do her arraignment, and I get the notice of any statements, which started with, "My lawyer told me not to say anything, but this is what happened," and admitted to a variety of crimes. It was frustrating, to say the least. Not a police officer, but I do know of this house in my local village that was a notorious den of illegal substances. The police came to search that place, but couldn't find anything. And as they were leaving, the lovely owner yelled at them that they should have brought the dogs. So yeah, they came back a few days later with the illegal substance sniffing dogs and found huge amounts of that hidden away. Absolute morons. When I was growing up, a cop approached my mom, who's an attorney, at our house. She closed the door behind her, and I watched the interaction inside with my doggo. Now, my mom was always very honest with me about criminal stuff. She probably wanted to scare me out of committing crimes, something that largely worked. She comes back inside a good 30 minutes later and tells me about the stupidest dealers ever. Guy and girlfriend sell mad amount of illegal substances just down the block from my house. They are the big boy distributors of the area. It's a decent-sized city, but on the smaller side, so I don't know how the heck the illegal substance scene works. And the cops have been hoping to bring these guys down. Well, the cops caught a break when they confessed to a dispatcher. Turns out they were robbed by a rival dealer and their computer was stolen. This is the early 2000s, so desktops were pretty clunky, along with all of their illegal substance. They called 911 and proceeded to tell them all of these details, somehow never realizing their stupidity. The cops swooped in, the station is literally 2 minutes away, and arrested the lot of them, and then told my mom everything. They were in our neighborhood, and my mom knows and is loved by everyone. Moral of the story? When reporting your house is being robbed, maybe leave out the part where all of your illegal substances was stolen. You know, I'm really curious how that conversation actually went down over the phone. 911, what's your emergency?
Oh, thank God. Everything's been robbed. I'm reporting a robbery.
Okay.
My new Dell computer and all my illegal substances are gone.
Oh, please go on.
The white stuff, the powder, the sugar cherries, all the wings. It's the good stuff.
Yep. We'll come pick you up in a couple minutes.
Honey, I did it. I told them everything. Oh God, I told them everything.
I was asked to help keep the peace while 2 probation officers searched a guy's house. In most jurisdictions, you have to submit to a search of your person and your home if you're on probation. During the search, a PO lifted the probationer's mattress and said monotonously, "Wow." The probationer got upset and said, "Yeah, it's freaking snow in my piece. Arrest me. I don't give a freak." Turns out the PO found a huge naughty toy, but after the guy opened his mouth, the PO lifted the mattress more and found a bunch of individually wrapped grams of snow and a weapon. The PO said that seeing the naughty toy was enough for him to ignore the mattress, but because the guy said something, he kept looking. That guy's attitude and his need to open his mouth got him 10 years in prison. Not me, but my boyfriend. Boyfriend's working overnight when a guy comes through town doing 35 miles per hour in a 25-mile area. Boyfriend pulls the guy over and asks for his documentation, license, registration, insurance. Guy flips open his glove box, snatches his documents out, and snaps the glove box closed super fast. Boyfriend laughs and says, "What do you have in there?" Guy gets a little sheepish and says, registration, insurance, a little bit of leaf. Boyfriend, "What?" Guy coughs and says, "Registration, insurance, and a little bit of leaf." Boyfriend laughs again and says, seriously? Can I see?" Guy got a slap on the wrist for being honest and having a very small amount. Currently watching live PD, and the guy told the officer, "I have caffeine pills in my back pocket." Gets them out, puts them on the hood. Everyone's chill. The dude then comes clean and says it's Molly, and the officers look at each other and go, "Do we even have a test kit for that?" Other officer says, "No." Dude's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. I saw PD as well, ironically in my hometown, where a woman pulled off the highway unnecessarily with another car that the cop initially intended to pull over. She mentioned to the cop that she wanted to have a few words with the other vehicle because they were being rumpholes and trying to race her. This is why the cop pulled the other car over, because they were speeding. Anyways, officer tells her no and that she needs to leave, and that it would not only be unsafe, but also illegal if she got out of her vehicle like that on the side of the highway. She says, okay, whatever. Cop proceeds to speak with the other vehicle, and she is still parked there, now yelling out her window at the other vehicle. Both the cop and the people are laughing, and he still does nothing. Cop goes to write the speeding ticket, and this witch gets out of her car and approaches the other vehicle. He finally freaking cuffed her and put her in the squad car, all the while she's complaining that it's completely unfair, was completely dumbfounded. Okay, so we had a DUI accident where a guy kept driving straight into the woods into a tree because his GPS was predicting a future street. He walked back to his hotel room and left his check and papers in the car. So we go to the hotel and go to his room and knock on the door. He did not have to answer, but he did. He was pretty clearly intoxicated. I asked him if he had anything to drink since the accident. He did not have to answer, or he could have told us that he drank after the accident. He said, No, I haven't had anything to drink since the accident. And where I'm from, you have 24 hours to report a property damage only accident, so it wasn't even a hit and run. So, as I'm locking the guy up, he tells me he's a lawyer. I told him, I hope you're not a defense attorney. But in his defense, he was intoxicated. I can respect that. A man who follows his GPS, his Siri, all the way to the end. Turn left.
But Siri, that's just the ocean. Are you sure that's the way to Disney World?
Yes, turn left. Do it now.
Okay, here we go.
Yes, another one. When I was in high school, I liked to park in parking spots that cars had parked poorly into just as a muck you. One time, I was at a high school football game and a Jeep had parked like crap. He was nearly halfway into the spot next to him and parked at an angle. I was driving a 98 Chevy Silverado at the time, a big old pickup truck, and I had my brother help guide me into the spot so I was perfectly in the lines. That made it so the driver door was completely impossible to get in. I took a picture for the novelty of it and went on my way. When I got back to my car, the Jeep was gone and every panel on the passenger side of my car was keyed. There was an officer nearby, so I told him about it and showed him the picture. He told me there's not a lot they could do because there were no witnesses, but he'd give it a shot. He looked up their license plate, called them, and asked them if they had done it. They confessed and ended up having to pay $1,600 in restitution along with getting a felony. My friend was pulled over for not wearing a seatbelt while he was with a few buddies, gets handed his ticket, and the guy in the back seat says, "Am I going to get a ticket too?" Officer replies, "Well, were you wearing a seatbelt?" No." "All right. Can I see your ID?" Not really the brightest fella. I don't know why, but I love how, he was excited by this. Hey, oh, come on, man. Can I have a ticket?
Yeah, me too. Come on, I want one. Let's all get one.
Oh, shucks. All right, kids. Everyone gets a ticket today. Hooray!
I pull over this guy for expired tabs, ask for his ID, and he's feeling around for his wallet. Can't find it. He says, man, I'm one of you. It's cool." "Oh, what department?" "Oh, actually, I'm a security guard, but same thing." I'm polite. "So, where's your ID?" "Oh, it's in the..." And he motions to the trunk. "It's in the trunk?" "Actually, no." My BS radar is going off. "Okay. You want to get your ID out of the trunk?" Nah, I don't have it." He starts looking around for another story to use, but now I know I'm supposed to stay out of the trunk. He's also not giving me any more information. "No ID, then I have to take you in and get you fingerprinted." I'm going to get in that trunk one way or another. He's looking like he's lost. I ask him what's in the trunk, but he's not talking anymore. We pull him out and get him in cuffs. Another officer takes him to get ID through fingerprints. Since his car is expired past 6 months, California laws, we tow the car. In the process of getting ready to tow the car, we need to take a quick inventory. In the trunk was a police uniform with fake patches and a metal badge. No weapon, but a duty belt. He also has stacks of explicit imagery of children. This is a guy who a neighboring city had been looking for months. His MO was to dress as a police officer, talk to kids, and you can figure out the rest. If he just gave me his name, I could have looked up his ID and verified he had one. I'd probably have let him go, but the neighboring city had zero information as to his name. They only had a vague description of the car and the fact he was posing as a police officer. In fact, what he would do is start talking to a kid in the 9 to 12-year-old range, tell him he has to be taken in for questioning, and handcuff the kid and take him to his car. He was a bad dude. So this happened a few years ago. I was patrolling my buddy at night. It was almost the end of our shift. Suddenly, we get an alert that a local nearby gas station had just been robbed, unsuccessfully, and that the suspect was supposed to pass by us in a red car. Indeed, seconds later, we saw a man speeding through the road. Details on the side, we ended up catching him on a dead-end street. When my buddy was handcuffing the suspect, I asked the suspect if he had something to do with the robbery. He repeatedly said,
I've never been there. Ask the ginger lady.
Turns out the cashier that night was an old lady named Marcy, covering up for her ill daughter, whom would have never been able to identify him since he was wearing a black mask during the robbery, which we never found. Marcy had ginger hair. Fortunately, the suspect was kind enough to inadvertently confess the crime. How could he know the appearance of the cashier if he had never been at the crime scene? The jury thought the same. Fellow officers stopped a car for a turn violation. Guy's wannabe illegal substance dealer, who we've seen around the bars before. We were talking with him and asked permission to search his car. He agrees. I'm bullcrapping with him about sports and weather, and the officer finds a duffel bag. So I joke and say, nothing in there that's dangerous, right? Like bombs or grenades or explosives. He nods and says, yeah, a bunch of dynamite. I'm waiting for him to laugh or smile or shrug or do something that screams it's a joke. Nothing. I say, I'm going to open the bag and look, okay? Expecting at any moment he will stop me. He doesn't. It was 8 sticks of dynamite he stole from a construction site. Separate story. If he didn't say anything, I would have ignored the bag thinking it was tools. He was getting supplies from an MC to terminate someone. Needless to say, he went to prison for a few years. Pulled a guy over because his car was looking pretty run down. Wanted to lecture him that he shouldn't be driving around at night with only half his lights working. We got out of our car, and I approached the driver window, and he looks at me and says, yeah, all right, I admit it. I smoked some leaf. Alrighty then. Wanted to give him another chance. What? We know your lights are broken. No, I smoked the leaf. Cue the eye roll. Gosh darn it, man. So we parked his car and drove him to have a blood test done. We were already done with our shift for an hour because we waited for a long time for the doc. So when we got out, I was ready to go home. He turns to me and says, I can't call anyone to pick me up or I'll get in trouble. Good Samaritan kicks in, ends up driving the guy home. He's a chill dude, obviously. I don't know what happened to him afterwards. He probably lost that internship we were talking about. Some idiots from my hometown broke into a few houses in the early 2000s. Among several stolen items was a handheld video camera. They proceeded to record themselves breaking into several more houses and posing back home with their haul. Several of the items, including said camera, ended up at pawn shops. Well, when the battery died, they didn't remove the tape. As is customary, the pawn shop found a compatible charger and watched the recordings. Copies of their fingerprints, IDs, and the video were turned into the police, and these morons went to jail. Almost everything from the videos was recovered from area pawn shops. Not a cop, but I have a buddy that is. Nothing too crazy, but he's had countless moments where he's tried to give people a break, or all they had to do was sit down and be quiet, but they end up talking themselves into jail. Recently had a dude he pulled over that was a bit over the limit for a DUI, but not too much, so he was going to let a friend pick him up instead of arresting him. Guy got to talking and basically revealed driving under the influence was something he did fairly regularly. A single mistake is one thing, but my buddy decided the best chance at getting him to stop would be learning the lesson the hard way. Not a cop. I had a roommate in college that was no friend of mine. He got in a fight at a bar and was kicked out. He tried to go back into the bar and got thrown out again, but a cop happened to be driving by the second time. The cop told him to relax or he was going to be arrested, and he told the cop to arrest him. The cop handcuffs him and puts him in the back of the cop car. Roommate then started banging on the window. Cop then recuffed him with his hands behind his back. Roommate's stupidity carried on for the next couple of months. He was supposed to go to court over the whole thing but didn't show up. Police showed up at his job, cuffed him, and brought him to court. Judge told him he would have just received a slap on the wrist, but he now had to send him to jail for a couple of days. He was scheduled to report to jail a week or two later, and he didn't show up for that either. By this time, he disappeared. I never saw the guy again. Not a cop, but a witness. During college, my friends and I would hang out outside and smoke hookah. Frequently, we would invite strangers who passed by to join, or campus police would casually chat with us as they made their rounds. So, one time, a group of freshmen walked past and asked to join. After about 15 minutes, the campus police car rolls up and the freshmen get visibly nervous. We tell them to calm down. The cops are chill. As soon as the cop gets out of the car, one freshman bolts and he makes it about 20 feet before the cop tackles him. We all clap and heckle the kid. Upon searching him, the cop finds a bunch of leaf. Then he says, You realize prior to running I had no reason to be suspicious? I just wanted to talk to my friends over there. And points at us. The cop ends up writing a ticket and sends him off. In college, after an early football game, we had a large group at my house. We were planning on partying, but there was a really good game on, so everyone was just sitting around watching the game. We were about 50-50, underage, ages 20 to 22. There were a few people who had beers, but the drinking had not started. People were flowing in steadily, and I guess the neighbors saw the amount of cars and called the cops to file a noise complaint at 7 p.m. There was a knock at the door, and someone said, "Come in." In walks a cop. I surveyed the room to realize everyone who had a beer was over 21, except one. Just as the officer was about to speak, she takes off and dives from the couch to behind the kitchen counter. The cop pauses, shakes his head, said there was a noise complaint, but he had been sitting outside for 10 minutes and hasn't heard a word. Said to enjoy the game, looks at the kitchen, shakes his head again, and walks out. Luckily, I lived in the town next door to the college, or it would have been a rough night. This situation came from a friend of mine. So we lived with 3 other guys in a 4-bedroom apartment. One day, when only one roommate was home, the police came knocking. They asked if they could come in and search for suspected illegal substance usage. Here's where I should mention the roommate who was home was kind of an oblivious shut-in who spent most of his day playing World of Warcraft or Magic the Gathering in his room. So of course he says, "Sure, come on in," having no idea what his roommates have been up to. In room 1, they find nothing, as that was the oblivious guy's room. Room 2, they find a personal bag of leaf. Room 3, they find a pipe. Roommate 3 didn't smoke, but he and roommate 2 played video games a lot, so it belonged to roommate 2. In room 4, they find a possession with intent to distribute, giant bag of leaf. Apparently just a crap load. Roommate 2 told me it was the most leaves he'd ever seen in one place, and he was angry because he always bought from someone else. Didn't know his roommate was a dealer. 3 of the 4 get arrested, only one who didn't was the guy who let them in. My friend was roommate 3, charges against him got dropped because roommate 2 fessed up to the pipe being his and got a slap on the wrist. Not sure what happened to roommate 4, they never saw him again. Former Walmart employees of Reddit, what are your horror stories? My mom was a manager at Walmart. She told me about this woman who was trying to steal a prepaid phone. When she got caught by security, she used the knife she was attempting to open the plastic packaging with to cut the security dude after cutting herself. She then went on to scream at him that she has an infectious disease and now he's going to have it for trying to stop her. I used to do field service for Walmarts in the Portland, Oregon area. The East Portland stores were especially fun. The Wood Village, Eastport Plaza, and Happy Valley stores are relatively close together, and we techs refer to them as the Gauntlet. The Eastport Plaza store was especially active, and we nicknamed that one the Thunderdome. Every visit, we would witness an arrest or something more exciting or disgusting. Last Christmas, for instance, while Frank Sinatra's version of Mistletoe and Holly was playing, a dude was totally face-planted by some cops after resisting arrest, in the process damaging the automatic doors and knocking over a display. Another time, a tech witnessed the arrest of the hottest-looking naughty worker ever on 82nd Street, being cuffed and stuffed in the parking lot. One day, I arrived at Thunderdome and noticed that I could not get the customer service desk to check in. Several workers were not allowing people to pass, and there was also a number of orange cones marking the restricted area. A quick whiff indicated what my eyes later confirmed. Crap all over the floor. The men's room is right next to the customer service area. Eventually, they had to break out the Zamboni machine to finish cleaning up. I had about 10 registers to work on there that day. They beat the hell out of their equipment in that store, and after 2 hours, I was ready to take a leak and check out. They still weren't letting anybody into the men's room. God only knows what horrors there must have been. Working there as a cashier since October, Christmas Eve rolls around and thank God I'm not scheduled to work. Cue phone call from the manager asking why I haven't come in yet that day. I'm not on the schedule? Manager. Yes, you are. I'm not coming in. I wasn't on the schedule. Next day I worked was the day after Boxing Day went, and looked at the schedule, and lo and behold, someone wrote that I was supposed to work in pencil. I quit shortly thereafter. I had a coworker call me one morning, and when I answered the phone very sleepily, she just started crying and asked, "You didn't know you were scheduled, did you?" I hadn't been scheduled, but my boss changed the schedule after my previous day of work and didn't inform me. I couldn't get to work that morning because of my lack of transportation, and I had to hang up after a painful conversation with my sobbing coworker. I transferred not long after that since my boss let that happen a few more times. I shouldn't have to wake up at 5 in the morning to call my boss and see if I'm scheduled for the day simply because she changed the printed schedule constantly. You see, coworkers couldn't leave until coverage arrived. If you're the only trained cashier and the next person doesn't show up and no one else on the floor is cashier trained, they want you to stay until the late person shows up. But if they'd already worked 8 hours and covered for 2 additional hours with their coverage not showing up, she was likely to be overworked and at her wit's end only to call and realize no one was coming and she'd have to do a double shift. I worked at Walmart about 13 years ago at one of the few stores left that closed overnight. It was a regular old Walmart, not at all super. I worked overnight stalking. I liked it. I only dealt with customers for a couple hours before the store closed and then just stocked the shelves. I mainly worked in the automotive department, and the nights would go by really fast. I worked with a bunch of people who were related to each other. There was a dad, Steve, his wife's sister, and a stepdaughter who worked there during the day in the jewelry department. Steve stocked the sporting goods department right next to mine. This guy was really gross. He would constantly pop over to my section and ask me if I needed help lifting stuff up onto the overstocked shelves, and he would make comments about how pretty I was and how if he was 10 years younger, he'd date me. Dude was pushing 50 and I was just a 19-year-old girl. I just laughed off his comments, say I didn't need help, and that I was perfectly happy with my boyfriend, thank you. One night, he decided to tell me how big his one-eyed monster was. He relayed a story, a total lie I'm sure, about how one day he was getting out of the shower and his stepdaughter, who was 17, saw him accidentally and exclaimed about how nice his one-eyed monster was and how she wanted to try it out. I was dumbfounded and I did not know what to say. I just said, "Oh, well, I gotta get back to work," and kind of shuffled away. A week later, he was caught doing the deed with his wife's sister in the bathroom at work. They were both fired, his wife quit, and his stepdaughter continued to work there. Mine isn't as bad as some of those here, but it was its own special kind of awful. I worked on third shift for a summer between college years. The Walmart I was in had about 1 hour's worth of music playing over the speakers all night, playing on a non-stop loop. My sleep habits were already pretty mucked from trying to adjust to third shift, but the music is what really did it. I heard that same music loop over and over again, all shift, 5 days a week. When I left the store, I would still hear it running in my head. Then I started hearing it in my dreams. Then it got so ingrained that I started just dreaming I was working my shift at Walmart. Several days a week, I would have the experience of working an entire 8-hour shift. Then just around quitting time, my alarm clock would go off, and I would wake up and go work an 8-hour shift. I quit a few weeks early at the end of the summer because I was losing my gosh darn mind. I sprained my back moving product in the back. At first, I thought it was a pulled muscle, and I walked towards the pharmacy to try and buy a heating pad and some Tylenol. I made it to jewelry, barely keeping conscious from the pain. I asked my coworker to call management and let them know I had hurt myself pretty badly and needed to go to the hospital. Management told her to have me go back to the office to fill out paperwork. I blacked out twice going back and was yelled at for taking so long. I ended up being out for a month and a half for the injury and got a whopping $24 in workman's compensation because the second I got hurt, my hours were reduced to 1 hour a week. I hate Walmart. A friend of mine was working part-time at Walmart. He'd been there for over a year. He He was working any and all positions, shifts that they threw at him, so he could try to provide for his wife and unexpected baby. He started to apply for any and all full-time positions as they really needed the benefits. One day, management took him aside and told him this was not the Walmart way, and he needed to make a plan with steps on how to get a particular position. Apparently, anything full-time is not okay. Walmart wants to help you achieve your specific goals, but really Walmart wants to use you as much as they can and break your spirit. Once I had a woman who was giving me a hard time about a coupon that was expired. Coupon people are the worst. She refused to give up. She really wanted that $1 off. My line was getting really long and I was getting really frustrated. So I reached in my pocket and pulled out a $5 and said, "If I give you a $5, will you give up on this coupon?" She got angry and said, "I can't believe you said that to me." She told the CSM, but I didn't get in trouble for it. The amount of times that people ask me why we don't take coupons after they expire is ridiculous. They have a freaking date on them for a reason. I'll start with my grossest. A woman comes in with some underwear and said they didn't fit, and she wanted to return them for cash because she had already bought the correct size elsewhere. She had a receipt and plopped a Walmart bag down on the counter. Inside this bag were 6 crusty, crap-stained underwear that were a biohazard from 6 feet away. Needless to say, I did not touch them. I paged the manager on duty and he tells me to just take them back, despite being very gross. Processed the return and she happily left the store with her $8. Former cart pusher. Had an old lady try to tip me $1 after I helped her bring her newly bought plants or some crap to her car. Told her I couldn't accept it per company policy, and it was only $1, so it wasn't particularly enticing. She then proceeded to roll over in her little scooter mobile and stuff it down the front of my pants. She chuckled dirtily as she rolled away. Yo, Granny is making it rain over here. Look at all those pennies. Just tossing pennies at all of those cart pushers. I love going to Walmart. I get to see all the chunky hunkies. Here, pennies for everyone. I worked for Malwart 11 years ago for a whopping total of 8 months. I worked the overnight shift as an overnight stalker for Department 8, Pets. The store I worked at had just gotten brand new high-rise shelves installed. They were said to be able to hold over a ton. Well, one night after getting all my regular freight stocked and overstock put into the bins, my bosses had me pull 8 pallets of Arm & Hammer cat litter. The boxes had a bonus 10 pounds inside, making them nearly 35 or so pounds apiece. They wanted all of those on the high risers. I asked if they were absolutely sure the shelves would be able to handle all that weight. I threw a crap fit about it because I know I was in the right for being worried. Other department managers who were there also sided with me. They watched me over the next couple of hours as I carefully did my job. As I was putting the final 12 boxes on the bottom shelf, I heard a cracking and tearing sound. And the next thing I know is I'm buried underneath all of the cat litter that had caused the shelves to collapse. Everybody in the store heard it happen, and everybody was explicitly told not to dial 911 or anything. Muck that crap! After getting all my blood cleaned from my face and cuts patched up, I called my uncles, then my girlfriend, who was a lawyer, told her what had just occurred and what the upper management is attempting to do. As of today, I still haven't spent all the money I received as a result of going to court over it. Muck Walmart. I was a department manager in frozen foods. One day, on one of my days off, so I didn't witness this, one of my employees came into work seeming very confused and disoriented. She couldn't remember the date, what day it was. Someone asked her what her name is. She couldn't remember. She clearly had what some would call a very minor case of serious brain damage. The store refused to call 911 and instead called for her mother to pick her up and take her to the hospital. Apparently something that not everyone appears to be aware of is that if you ask someone, "What is your name?" and they respond, "I don't know," then you need to call for an ambulance. This woman had a blood vessel in her brain that popped. Her head partially exploded. It could have terminated her. And those cheap plastards at Walmart wouldn't call 911. There was also someone in produce who had a heart attack. The store didn't call 911 for him either. One of the other produce associates had to volunteer to take him to the hospital. Walmart is the only place I've ever worked at where I could say they wouldn't care if I passed on right there in the store. And it wouldn't be hyperbole. Muck Walmart. Wow, there definitely is a theme here. That's 2 stories now of people nearly just getting terminated in the store. Is there a rule or something that you just can't call 911? That's insane. Why would they do this? What's wrong with you, Walmart? I was working at Walmart at the beginning of this year. Aside from weird older men hitting on me, it wasn't that bad. A few weeks before the minimum pay was raised, they decided I needed a new position in the store. I was told that I was great with people and need to be out helping customers as opposed to checking. Sales associates get paid less than cashiers. They told me that since it was basically a promotion for me, that they would let me keep the cashier pay instead of lowering me to sales pay. I agreed to the job for that reason, plus new job was full-time. A week later, they take me to sign the papers for the job switch, and the manager gets to the pay part. He says, "I know we told you that we could keep the same pay, but it's just easier to make it the same as everyone else's. Besides, everyone's pay is going up in a few weeks anyway." So I just agreed, whatever, still going to be making more. Then my hours start getting cut. I agreed to 40 hours. I was cut down to 25. My manager said he messed up the schedule on accident and would fix it. It continued happening every week. I finally got so frustrated I just left one day and never came back. 4 hours into my first shift, I was facing items on a bottom shelf while a coworker was facing items on the top shelf. She dropped a gallon of Gatorade on my head. Management refused to let me report the injury or leave to seek medical attention. I finished the shift, dazed and in pain. The next day, I found out my skull was broken. Officially, since I was not allowed to report the injury, it didn't happen at work. I rage quit. This happened before I got hired, but I heard enough about it from coworkers. An elderly couple would come in once a week to go shopping. The old man had trouble walking, so he would kiss his wife and go sit in the fitting room area until she was done. One day, they came in and did the little kiss, and he also handed her his wedding ring, like he knew something was about to happen. A couple minutes of sitting there after his wife walked off, the guy collapsed to the floor, and the fitting room ladies called 911. One of the department managers of the time was also a paramedic, so he rushed over. The old guy started to cough up blood, and every available associate had to come and make a wall of people so customers don't see what is going on. All these associates saw and heard the guy choking on his own blood, now coming out of his nose and ears, passing on the floor. They were trying to find his wife, and no one could find her, and the associates had to wait a half an hour for the coroner to get down there and take the body. The associates who saw it still have flashbacks about it. One day, a woman stole a bottle of perfume and took it to the bathroom. She poured it out into her own container and then proceeded to fill the container with her own urine. She then took the bottle up to the returns and tried to return it. To this day, I have no idea why my manager gave her the refund. It was very obvious that the woman urinated in the bottle because it was still warm. A woman steals perfume, returns her own urine, and profits from Walmart. You know, it takes a type of crazy to actually be prepared to do stuff like that. Is that in her agenda? Is that in her calendar? Yes, today is going to be a wonderful day as I'm just going to steal some delectable perfume from Walmart and then just return it for an extra few bucks with my equally as valuable urine. That's a whole nother level of crazy. I warn you, and I warn myself, we are never going to go to Walmart late at night. Just no. Someone left a baby in a stroller just chilling in one of the aisles one night. I was a cashier at the time, so I don't know all of the details, but from what I know, authorities got involved and the guy came back after what we think was at least an hour or two, appearing oblivious to what he did wrong. I don't think he spoke much English, so it was just a confusing situation all around. Thank God for the guy stalking who was looking out. We're lucky it didn't get any worse knowing how crazy people who come through can be, let alone at night. What's weird was this wasn't even brought up again with my coworkers, so I don't recall what ended up happening to the guy. It was just another stupid thing we witnessed. The whole don't call 911 thing was standard also at Target. I worked in the deli and our gloves to clean the slicer went missing one day. They are reinforced to help in case your finger makes contact with the blade, so the blade won't slice through your finger. Well, I told my manager we needed gloves and kept reminding her every day I worked, but she would just reply with, "I've let the e-tail know." One day I'm cleaning the slicer, it's taken apart so it can't open any wider than the locked in closed position. But there's an open spot at the top where the sharpener goes. Anyway, I'm cleaning it and my finger catches the blade right on the tip and it gets cut off. I felt a sting, thought it was minor, and went to the sink. I take off my latex gloves and start rinsing and I see my fingertip is gone, just flat and pouring blood. So I wrapped it in my pure white deli coat and walk out to the deli in the front. I showed the leader on deck for the night and she freaks out, pulls me into the break room and then has somebody take me to the hospital. Some people suggested she call an ambulance after about 20 minutes of me standing at the sink bleeding. Then she pulled in a guy who was shopping that was a part-time firefighter and he took one look and said, "I should have been at the hospital 30 minutes ago." Crazy. This guy comes in on a busy day and I start ringing him up for all kinds of stuff from around the store, including the newly released PS2 and GameCube. Yeah, I worked there a lifetime ago. He writes a check and I proceed to process it in our little machine. It comes back with a suspicious error, so I tell him the machine is acting weird and outside of earshot, I call a manager over. He starts getting visibly nervous as a few CSMs, cashier managers, come over and inspect the check. They ask him a few questions and take the check and disappear, stating they need to run it on a different register and that there's nothing to worry about and they'll be right back. After a few minutes, he is sweating bullets and eventually starts slowly making his way out of electronics. His pace quickens until he's full on running for the door. I watch him from the register because, frick it, I'm not breaking a sweat for minimum wage. And bam! Our huge security guy tackles him to the ground, picks him up, and escorts him up front. At this point, I tell a coworker to take over the register, and I head up front to see what else happens. I just had a feeling. I get there to see the guy meet up with the CSMs that took the check, a handful of managers, and a few police. They present the check to him, ask where he got it, and before anyone can react, he lunges forward, grabs the check, and eats it. Dude ate the check. They wrestle with the guy a little and bring him into the back room. Customers and staff alike were staring in disbelief at what had just occurred. I found out later that the guy was traveling from Walmart to Walmart across state borders, passing bogus checks. So, yeah, normal stuff.
Police officers of Reddit, what's the weirdest thing you've caught teenagers or kids doing that is illegal but you found hilarious? I feel like a cop has a story about me and two other people. Here it goes. I was 20 at the time and was at an outdoor party with a lot of friends. Late fall, 50 degrees or so, no leaves left on the trees, roughly 50 to 60 people, mostly underage, and we were wasted. My friend's parents lived in a nice part of a bad area and owned an inflatable bounce house business. They had everything set up. A bounce house, sumo suits, massive slides, all sorts of fun stuff. Around 10:30, it's getting loud and the police show up. Someone yells, "Cops, run!" And everyone starts running. I decide to join the crowd and end up hiding in a bush with 2 other people. Then reality hits. I'm wearing a white hoodie, the guy next to me has a neon yellow hoodie, and the girl had a freaking glow necklace on. The bush? No freaking leaves on it. Right then the cops walk up and starts laughing and asks, "Really guys?" and shines the flashlight directly on us. He instructs us to head back to the driveway with the other captives and gives all of us a pretty hilarious speech. Seriously, we are the Flint Police Department. We have a million things better to do than chase down a bunch of wasted minors. We were just coming by to tell you to keep the noise down. Now we were pouring out all of your drinks and calling your parents. Now we're even. I kinda had a similar experience once when I was young and foolish. A large group of underage kids were at a party one night and then we decided to go grab some food. I was quite wasted and having difficulty walking on my own, so a couple of friends were holding me up. After a while, a couple of cop cars pulled into the street that we were walking down and all of my friends scrambled. One of the guys holding me up grabs my open bottle of booze out of my hand before running off. So I am left standing on my own in the middle of the street, very obviously wasted. And the cop comes up to me, asks if I had been drinking, and I tell him yes at a party. They ask me if I have any booze on me and tell them yes, I do in my backpack. The cop just says, "Thanks for being honest. We knew about your party, and it all seemed under control there, and you guys can drink at a private place, but you can't be drinking in public. You're gonna have to pour out that drink that you have in your backpack where I can see it. Then you need to go and find your buddy who took that open bottle off you and tell him that you owe him one, because you would be in serious trouble if we found you with that open bottle. Now have a good night, and don't get into any more trouble." Then he just walks back to the car with the other guys and drives off. Took me about 20 minutes to find my friends and tell them what happened. One of them just starts laughing out loud, saying that he was hiding in a bush nearby and watched the whole thing go down, and thought I was about to get super busted. I only ever went to one party where the cops showed up. It felt like a rite of passage to run away when they showed up. Wouldn't do that today though. Had a cop search my backpack once and found a couple of drinks and a box of pee-pee balloons. I was with my friends at the time, so he was like, "Why are there 3 drinks, a box of pee-pee balloons, and only 2 dudes?" I was speechless. "To be fair, officer, now there's 3. Raunchy music intensifies." My brother was a cop who worked nights in Minneapolis. One snowy night near the U of M campus, he noticed a car weaving, so he pulled them over thinking there would be booze involved. Nope, it was a car full of deaf people having an argument which included the driver. He just told the driver not to sign and drive. Dude, that for sure is a real thing, and it's scary stuff. I have hearing impaired friends that are horrible drivers, and of course they leave the dome light on in the car to be able to communicate at night, which doesn't help the cause. I mean, I understand it must be boring to drive and not be able to listen to music, but man, that's so scary when they're trying to sign with somebody in the back seat. I've taken a couple of sign language courses in my day, and I never thought about doing signs while driving. I can totally see how that could be really scary. Not a cop, but I do have a radio scanner. Dispatcher. Reports of a teenager riding a skateboard unclothed down Westway. Cop. Is the suspect carrying a suspicious package? Yes, sir. His package appears to be fluorescent green. I'd say that's pretty suspicious. My brother is a cop, and he told me that one time he got a call at 9:30 in the morning for a suspicious person sitting in their car in our neighborhood. My bro goes up to him and asks him what he's doing. Dude is waiting for his wife to leave for work so he can go back home to play WoW all day instead of go to his own job. My bro tells him to go wait somewhere else because he's freaking out the neighbors. To clarify a few things, the guy was parked in a different neighborhood than his own because he was hiding from his wife until she left the house. So nobody knew him, and it's obviously suspicious to be idling your car in front of some random house in a neighborhood while kids are going to school. It's not illegal, but he took the good advice to go wait somewhere else, preferably more public like a Walmart parking lot or something. Also, the dude was scared as hell that the cops were going to tell his wife that he was hiding from her because he wanted to go back home and play video games. My brother, of course, doesn't give 2 craps about that. He just wants the dude to go somewhere else so people would stop calling about it and causing him needless work. I'm not sure who's weirder here, the guy who's got nothing better to do than poorly hide from his wife so he can go play video games all day, or the neighbors who have nothing better to do than look out the window all day. Hey now, I will say, if you have ever had your car broken into or have had something stolen from your house, everyone becomes suspicious after that. So I can't hate on the neighborhood watch types too much, but they shouldn't be calling the cops. My friend had a bunch of prop arms and legs in his car, college. He and his other friend were trespassing in the Northfield tunnels, Google it. And then they get back to their car where a cop is waiting. He asks to see what's in the trunk, so they open it. He jumps back a sec and quickly realizes the arms and legs are fake and he hasn't caught some type of serial killer. Then he gives them a very stern, shut the hell up, look as he calls his partner from the car to come look at this. All shaky voiced, as he tells my friend and his friend to put their hands up, hella serious. The other cop comes over, looks in the trunk and freaks the freak out, screams and runs away back to the cop car. At which point the first cop busts out laughing and tells my friend, he was in Vietnam. And then he does the get out of here gesture and sends them on their way. So basically he used my friends to pull a super cruel practical joke on his partner. I had a friend who was a barber, so he always had those creepy mannequin heads in his car and all over his house. The kind that they use to practice cutting hair. Well, one night he was getting pulled over for a minor traffic violation. License and registration, I'm gonna ask you to get out of your car and put your hands behind your head. So he cuffs my buddy and sits him down on the curb and then searches the car. And he pulls a mannequin head out of the back seat and he's like, oh, thank God. Why do you have this in your car? My buddy explains that he's going to barber school and they practice on those things. So then he and the cop, both super stressed out at this point, sit on the curb and share a cigarette. We got a call about kids, probably 11 or 12 years old, jumping across backyards. They were looking for something to steal, I guess. We searched for them for about 15 minutes. Just as I was starting to get bored with it, I hear laughing coming from a drain pipe. It's about 4 feet tall. My mate and I decide to head in. About 30 meters down the tunnel, I can see this kid bent over on all fours, pants down around his ankles. His mate is bent over, sitting on his back while the first kid's exposing his rear end. There is a third kid kneeling next to the first kid's full moon holding a lighter. They were in the midst of doing Blue Angels, aka lighting farts in a dark tunnel. I had no freaking clue what to say. We told them to come out of the drain with us. I advised them not to tell any of their friends what they were doing in that tunnel because they would probably get the wrong reputation. And I ended up driving them within a block of one of the kids' houses so the parents didn't see that they got caught. Come out with your pants up! I was a cop in the Air Force. We had just gone into a higher threat level, and around 11 at night, I saw 3 people in an empty dark field near some power lines with shovels and a garden hoe. My partner and I decided to stop them and see what was going on, because it didn't look like civil engineering or anyone that should be out there around that hour. So we go up and see that they're about 14 or 15 years old and they're all sweating and out of breath. We asked them what they're digging for and they all say that they weren't digging, which after looking around we didn't see any dug up dirt. So my partner asked what they're doing and they hesitantly answer that they were LARPing. One of their dads shows up and scolds them, telling them how shady they look, apologizing to us, and we send them all back to the dad's house, which was about 100 yards away. I hold back my laughter until I get back to the car, where I have to explain to my partner what LARPing is and why I'm laughing. Imagine your LARPing skills being so good that the cops get called on you. My brother was once jumping his bike off the end of a public boat dock behind the city hall, which also housed our police station. They had it tethered so it wouldn't get lost on the bottom. A cop came out and watched for a while and said, "I'm fairly certain something about that is illegal, but I can't figure out what it is and that looks like fun, so be safe," and walked back inside. There weren't a lot of local kids, but they all knew that we had no issue if they wanted to stop by and do some jumps, as long as they reeled the bike in and cleared the mud off afterwards. One day a bunch of us were taking turns doing jumps and basically just messing around at the lake, when this cottage kid from down the road rides up on his brand new, very expensively tricked out BMX bike. He parks up on the road a few hundred feet away from us watching, then sees his chance and just freaking hurdles his way down the ramp. A couple people try to wave him off, but this kid just goes for it, nails it at a blistering fast speed and flies 3 or 4 times faster than any of us could ever go with the tether. He pops out of the lake waving his fist in the air, shouting and carrying on like he just stole an Oscar from Leo. He swims back to shore and everyone is just staring at him while he carries on. Eventually, one of the girls just says, "Dude, was that a new bike?" The kid's face just kind of crumpled up in defeat. We all chipped in and tried to find the bike, but our lake is flooded farmland and the bottom is 6 or 7 feet of quicksand like mud. We dove, we drudged, we poked with paddles, nothing. Kid got in so much trouble. I don't think his parents ever bought him another bike. My friend and I were skateboarding around in front of a coffee shop. Big scary security guard came over, grabbed a skateboard, rode it around the parking lot, did an ollie and a kickflip, and then gave it back and left. We're talking 350 pounds, probably 35 to 40-year-old man. Our jaws were on the floor. It's always nice to hear cool cop stories instead of the awful ones you hear on the news nowadays. A few years ago, a friend and I were walking home through a residential estate, wasted after a night out. About halfway home, a police car pulls up next to us and says that they need to talk to us. They said that the CCTV in the area had observed us entering several front gardens. Since we were wasted, we tried to explain that we had been going into people's gardens and swapping around flower pots, hanging baskets and garden ornaments with their next door neighbors. One of the cops was laughing a lot and the other seemed really confused. Luckily, they got another call and just let us carry on our way. I got a call about 2 kids, maybe teenagers, smoking herb in their parked truck down by the duck pond. You know the one. Anyways, I contacted them and they were very respectful and insisted on filming me on their cell phones while I spoke to them. I told them I wasn't interested in their herb, still illegal in my state, but I wanted to make sure they got home safe, that the driver was sober enough to operate the vehicle. I did a basic field sobriety test on the driver and determined he was good to drive, all while his buddy was filming every movement and interaction. So I decided to have a little fun. By the end of the evaluation, I had the very nervous driver doing the YMCA, sprinkler move, and a janky version of the robot before he finally realized what was happening. His buddy filming realized right away. His defensive lawyer cameraman posture dissolved into a wasted kid that was now having a good time again. The driver broke down and busted up laughing before shaking my hand and hopping in his truck. The cameraman gave me a fist bump and just said, "Thank you," in a way that I took as, wow, good to know some of you are human. It's annoying that we have to live with this stigma that gets portrayed by popular media, and quite frankly, some of us deserve it, but it's still nice to know when you get through to someone. I mean, really alter their perception and break down a barrier put up by others. Cops are here to make sure people don't hurt one another. That's it. If you're going to hurt someone else, even if it's just a strong possibility, I'm your worst enemy. But if you're just swaying from societal norms that change like the weather and being yourself, have at it, man. You only live once. Okay, time to get off my soapbox. I didn't catch them, but when I arrived at my first station after graduating from the academy, I was talking to some of the guys who had been there a while. I asked if they knew my cousin, who lived in the patrol area. Turns out they did. They had a call a few years back of some kids driving around, pulling up next to cars at traffic lights and waving a huge pleasure stick at the drivers, laughing hysterically then driving off. They were pulled over, brought down to the station, and parents were notified. There was one old-timer who was a bit of a jerk, telling me that my cousin was a pervert, as were his friends. But the other guys said that they thought it was hilarious when it happened, and they never charged the kids with anything. I still mess with my cousin about this every time I see him. I'm pretty sure the Second Amendment protects the rights to pleasure sticks. When I was a teen living in the Phoenix area, we would fill up the back of a pickup with shaved ice from behind the ice rink and then build snowmen in people's yards. We would do it at night before ringing the doorbell and driving away. One time, a neighbor called the cops after hearing a couple of teens sneaking around outside. The cop came by and found out what we were doing. Instead of getting after us, he told us to follow him somewhere. We ended up making a snowman in his own front yard. He rang the doorbell and hid around the corner while his wife and their kids came outside. There are some good cops out there. Not all of them are like the ones you see shooting people without cause. Not a cop, but I was a soldier in the Army National Guard after 9/11. This informs the rest of my story. We were tasked with securing our armories immediately after 9/11 in case anyone decided to attack a soft target. This involves 24/7 armed security by soldiers with M16s in camouflage and body armor. This was immediately after the attacks, and for those who weren't old enough to remember it, stuff was weird at that time. Well, me and several fellow soldiers were guarding our couple-acre compound in the middle of a small city. Adjacent to this compound was a park with baseball fields that teenagers would go to, hook up, and party. Well, a blacked out car pulled down the road one night and my buddy was conducting a roving patrol that night, complete with night vision goggles. Well, they weren't in our compound, but they were pretty suspicious, so we called local law enforcement. By this time, I had met my fellow soldier out back to keep an eye on them. 4 cop cars come screaming down this entrance and draw their weapons. These kids were terrified. When they found out the cops were called, they asked who called. The cops shined their lights over at us and there stood 3 soldiers in camouflage with helmets, tactical vests, night vision goggles, and M16 staring back at them. We never saw that car again. I can only imagine the stories that they tell their friends. They were released and as far as I know, no charges were brought against them. I'm pretty sure when those kids talk about that story, they end up saying, "It was just like COD, bro." One of my friends from a couple of semesters ago was a cop a few cities over. He was a cool guy and we worked on our first class presentation together. Anyways, I'm sitting in my car before our class at 7 p.m. and I decided I'm going to smoke before class. This class was required, but almost insultingly easy. I usually walk around the parking lot with my J, but security guards were doing their rounds. And while they have a reputation of being pretty laid back, I didn't want to take a chance. So I'm in my car lighting up and casually reading my textbook. It's getting kinda smoky in my car, so I look around and then I crack a window to let the smoke out. Then when I saw security was gone, I rolled the window all the way down, ashed my J, and put it back in my mouth and got back to reading. Then out of the corner of my left eye, I see a cop car coming my way. It passed behind me and I didn't think anything of it because at this point I was already zoned out. When I realized that the J was still in my mouth, I got one of those sharp pains of terror that starts in your chest and shoots all the way up to your head. And your wasted brain is like, "Freak, we're freaked up, man." I started looking around for the cop car and I didn't see it. Then I looked out my passenger window and was like, "Man, thank God my windows are tinted." It was at this moment that I noticed my driver's side window wasn't as dark as it usually is. My brain is thinking, maybe it has to do with the placement of the light? Maybe it's because I'm closer to it? Is it because oh freak, it's because I left it open? After that realization, I saw headlights again and I just knew it was the cop car. Sure enough, the berries come on and over the speaker I hear, "Show me your hands." I do as he says and I show him my hands. "Open the door from the outside and step outside of the vehicle." So I do just that. "Hands, hands, I want to see them." Oh Christ almighty, they think I'm a dealer or something, and I can't even explain myself. I'm so freaking zoned out right now. "Put your hands on the roof of the vehicle and take 1 step back." Crap, I can do this. "Don't move those goddamn hands." Oh man, oh man, oh man. "Now twerk." What? "Twerk." Wait, did he just tell me to twerk? What the freak? I turn around and look at the cop car and then I just hear, "Twerk, twerk, twerk, hands on the car and twerk, twerk, twerk." At this point, I'm not sure what to do or think. The officer gets out of his car and it's the dude from my class. He said he saw me smoking up in my car and wanted to mess with me. I don't know how to explain what it felt like going to class after that. Hey now, I think it's fair game for cops to mess with you if they catch you doing something illegal. I think getting embarrassed is better than getting arrested. I rolled up on a group of kids trespassing on a patch of land at night. They didn't know they were technically breaking the law because there was no signage when they came in. I planned to tell them that they needed to leave, but one of them took me aside and told me that they were taking an out-of-town friend on a snipe hunt as a much-deserved act of revenge. I couldn't resist and I joined in. Winks and nods were exchanged. I called my shift on a radio back channel and the snipe hunter was called front and center. I informed him that the snipe is an endangered species and that the act of hunting one was a felony punishable by 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. All of his conspirators denied snipe hunting, saying that they were just stargazing and didn't know the guy that was doing the hunting. He was just standing there, wide-eyed, and literally holding a bag of snipe stick in his other hand. He stuttered and stammered an excuse, and insisted the conspirators were lying. About that time, 3 more cruisers appeared, lights and all, as if choreographed. We all stepped aside and the sheriff himself made an entrance and assessed the whole situation. Dead silence. After he made the inquiries, we all busted out laughing. The whole otherwise very slow night was captured in a group photo, complete with the victim, his friends, my shift, and the sheriff. Man, this must have been hilarious. I wish I met some cops like that when I was younger. The only one I met threatened to take my friend to jail because he had a license plate on his bike that we found in a ditch. Then the cop banned all of us from skating on one of the largest streets in my city, when we didn't really do anything. It's interactions like that that make some people dislike cops, in my opinion. That's it for this video. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. It's linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.